Welcome back to Ancient Secrets. Sit back, relax, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from down below. It's amazing seeing people all around the world supporting my small channel. Now enjoy the show. In the pitch darkness of an ancient tomb, a single flame quivers in the stale air, carrying the faint odour of dried resin and old incense. Its light dances over walls, dense with sacred hieroglyphs, spells etched in paint and plaster to guard a soul on its perilous journey. A painted eye of Horus stares from the gloom, and rows of figures, gods, monsters, protective symbols, seem to flicker to life in the wavering glow. At the chamber's centre lies a mummified body, swathed in linen and silence. On its chest rests a polished scarab amulet, placed there with desperate hope. If you could see its underside, you'd find tiny hieroglyphs etched into the green stone, a prayer beseeching the heart of the deceased not to betray him in the judgment hall to come. The stillness is profound, broken only by the soft hiss of the lamp's flame. It is a fragile light against the vast darkness of death, much as the Egyptians saw their own preparations as a fragile shield against the unknown horrors beyond. This haunting scene is not one of peaceful rest, but of vigilance. Every object in this crypt, every painted spell on the walls, every carved invocation on the sarcophagus, every amulet tucked among the wrappings, was put there to defend against a fate the ancient Egyptians feared deeply, the possibility that death was not an end to suffering, but the beginning of a treacherous odyssey. For in their vision, the afterlife was no gentle drift into eternal sleep. It was a journey, one fraught with hidden traps, fierce demons, and divine judgments, a journey that could end in everlasting bliss or utter annihilation. They feared the darkness beyond the tomb not because they doubted an afterlife existed, but because they believed so fervently in a next world that was as dangerous as it was miraculous. Imagine standing in that tomb with only a tiny flame to push back the dark. The walls around you whisper in ink and stone, prayers and words of power to guide a lost soul. The air is heavy with the perfume of ages past, as if the rituals performed here still linger in the gloom. You can almost sense the presence of the departed soul, hovering near its carefully preserved body, anxious and unsure. Will it find its way through the black void beyond this chamber? Will the protective spells hold back the chaos waiting on the other side? The Egyptians who built this tomb certainly hoped so. They left nothing to chance, for the stakes could not be higher. To die was to step into the realm of gods and monsters, and to face trials that would test the very essence of a person. The thought of failure, of being lost forever in the dark or condemned to die a second time, was terrifying. So they prepared, obsessively and devotedly, to meet their fate armed with magic and righteousness. Why did the ancient Egyptians fear the afterlife? To answer this, we must first wipe away our modern notions of death as simply a quiet sleep or an automatic ascent to heaven. We must step into their mindset, where death was a doorway into the unknown, an unknown teeming with both danger and possibility. Picture the soul of the deceased as a traveller setting out at dusk, leaving the familiarity of life for a shadowy realm called the Duat. In that realm, nothing was guaranteed, not even one's own identity or existence. It was said that without the proper spells and conduct, a soul might wander lost or fall prey to monstrous forces that prowl the underworld. The Egyptians did not take such risks lightly. They invested their genius, wealth and hearts into tilting the odds in favour of light over darkness. Their fear was not a passive, despairing dread, but a profound respect for cosmic justice, and the perils that awaited those who were unprepared or unworthy. It propelled them to create one of the most elaborate systems of afterlife preparation the world has ever seen. In this journey through time and imagination, we will walk alongside that ancient Egyptian soul as it ventures beyond the tomb. We will descend into the Duat, a churning netherworld of caverns, fire, and roiling chaos, guided by the wisdom of hieroglyphic texts and the voices of priests long gone. We will witness the soul's trials, the confrontation with serpents that strike from the darkness, the navigation of lakes of fire that could consume or cleanse, and the riddles of gatekeepers who bar the way. We will stand in the hall of two truths, where the heart of the dead is weighed against a feather, and the slightest imbalance could trigger oblivion at the jaws of a waiting monster. We will see why every step of this journey was envisioned as a struggle, a chance for triumph, but equally a chance for eternal loss. And through it all, we will find that this fear of the afterlife was intertwined with hope and meaning. It spurred the Egyptians to live justly, to honour their gods, and to treasure life's beauty enough to want it forever. Our story begins in the silence of the tomb, but it will not end there. As the flame gutters and our eyes adjust to the darkness, we follow the invisible path laid out for the soul. In ancient belief, the deceased would come forth by day, emerge from the night of death into a new dawn of existence, but only if they could survive the night. So let us follow that soul now, into the darkness it must traverse. Let the walls of this tomb speak, and the ancient spells guide our way. The fear that lived in the hearts of the Egyptians as they contemplated this journey will become our guide too, revealing step by step why they approached death not with complacency but with awe, caution, and relentless preparation. In that flickering light we glimpse not only the terror they felt, but the profound longing behind it, a longing for order, immortality, and meaning beyond the mortal horizon. The flame in the tomb sputters and goes out, symbolic of a life ending. But for the soul of the departed, this is the moment everything truly begins. In Egyptian belief, as the last breath escaped the lips and the tomb was sealed, the deceased awoke in a new, eerie landscape. Our traveller, let us call him Nakht, an ancient scribe whose earthly story has ended, steps out of his coffin in spirit form, finding himself still in darkness, but a different kind of night. This is the Duat, the underworld. It is not a void, but a vast shadow realm that stretches out like a mirror of Egypt in twilight, filled with strange sights and lurking dangers. Nakht's first challenge is simply to orient himself. The texts inscribed on his tomb walls had warned that a soul might be disoriented upon waking to the afterlife, not remembering its life on earth, its death, or what it must do next. But the painted guides around him, the very spells he commissioned in life, now glow faintly with magic to remind him. Proceed to the west, where Ra sails by night. The west was the direction of the sunset, and thus the mythic gateway to the land of the dead. So Nakht, in his ethereal form, follows the pull of those sacred directions. He moves as a Ba, a human-headed bird, the part of the soul free to fly, leaving the safety of the tomb behind. He senses that his Ka, his life force, remains tethered to his mummified body, lingering by the tomb to absorb the sustenance of offerings. But his Ba, the roaming spirit, must venture out on this journey. In time, if all goes well, the Ka and Ba will reunite to form an Akh, a blessed, effective spirit. For now, however, the Ba must travel on its own, with the tomb and Ka as a sanctuary to return to when needed. As he leaves the sealed tomb chamber, Nacht finds himself in a boundless gloom. But ahead there is a faint radiance, a ghostly outline of a path, perhaps formed by the prayers and spells that were recited at his funeral to light his way. Soon he comes upon a black, bottomless river cutting across his path. This must be the first of many thresholds in the duat. How to cross? In life, Nacht's family placed a tiny model boat in his tomb, and more importantly, a spell from the Book of the Dead to summon a ferry. Now, as he recalls the ancient words taught by priests, a boat emerges from the gloom, a slender skiff steered by a mysterious ferryman. The ferryman's eyes are hollow, and he croaks a challenge. Who seeks to pass? Declare to me your name and purpose, or you cannot board my craft. This is no ordinary boatman, but a gatekeeper spirit who will refuse passage to the ignorant or the unworthy. Nacht is prepared. From his memory, and perhaps from the papyrus scroll tucked beside his mummy, he speaks the correct response. He does not give his earthly name, Nacht, but rather a magical identity that the ferryman expects. I am he who is true of voice, a follower of Osiris justified by Ma'at. He also addresses the ferryman with a secret title learned in the funerary texts, and even recites a charm naming each part of the boat, the mast, the sail, the oar, as required by spell 99 of his Book of the Dead. The grizzled ferryman, satisfied that this traveller comes equipped with the proper knowledge and purity, gives a silent nod. Nacht steps aboard and the little vessel pushes off, gliding over the dark waters. All around the underworld is hushed but tense. In the distance he can see flickers of light, perhaps the glow of fires or the shimmer of guardian spirits in the far-off gloom. As the boat carries Nacht deeper, the true scope of the duat begins to unfold. It is not a single place, but a series of surreal regions, much like the divisions of night described in royal tomb texts. In 1 hour of the night there might be lush fields of reeds shrouded in perpetual twilight. In another, endless caverns of stone populated by strange beings. At first the journey is almost peaceful. The river runs through a marshland reminiscent of the Nile Delta, quiet and still. This, the texts say, could be the waters of Osiris, where the souls of the newly dead find a brief repose. Soft lotus blossoms drift on the water's surface. Nacht senses the presence of benign spirits there, perhaps the spirits of relatives who came before him, beckoning from the reed beds with reassuring smiles. He remembers a comforting spell about seeing the face of Osiris in the breeze that blows across these waters. For a moment the fear in his heart eases. He thinks of his family among the living, his wife who wept at his tomb, his little daughter who left a doll as a grave gift. Their love bolsters him. He yearns to earn the right to see them again someday in the field of reeds. Nacht takes stock of his resources. Tucked into the folds of his linen, or perhaps manifesting by magic, at his side is a papyrus, his personal Book of the Dead that was buried with him. Its presence is a great comfort now. Glancing at its fine hieroglyphic script, he recalls the many spells and vivid illustrations it contains, guidance for every conceivable hurdle. By the gentle luminescence surrounding him, he finds the section with hymns to Osiris and Ra. He intones a verse softly, "Homage to you, O Golden One, who rises in the horizon and illuminates the netherworld with your beauty." The sound of his own voice, steadying into the familiar prayer, gives him courage. He knows dozens of spells by heart from years of study and listening to temple readings, and the rest he can read from this scroll. Armed with this travel guide to eternity, he feels more confident that no matter what the duat throws at him, he has divine words of power to meet it. But the duat does not remain gentle for long. As the ferry passes beyond the safe marshes, it enters a realm of dread. The air grows thick and stifling as if charged with unseen evil. The ferryman's skiff scrapes to a halt upon a new shore, a desert within the underworld known as Rostau. Here, not grains of earthly sand, but black dunes of chaos stretch out under a starless sky. Jumbled rocks and mounds of bone gleam under a strange phosphorescent glow. Ahead, Nacht sees a looming gate set between two sharp peaks. It is the first of many gates he must traverse, each protected by monstrous guardians. Carved above this gate are images of two coiled serpents. As Nacht approaches, the carvings stir. The serpents come alive. They rise up on either side of the portal, each cobra as tall as a temple pillar. Their eyes glow red, and they hiss in unison, voices like steam from a cauldron. "Stop! Name us, or be our prey!" Their fangs drip venom that sizzles as it hits the ground. Once again, our traveller is ready, albeit his heart pounds with fear. He recalls a specific spell for overcoming serpents. During his mummification, a priest had placed a wax cobra under his feet and recited formulas to subdue the vipers of the Duat. Summoning all his courage, Nacht chants the secret names of these cobra demons as taught in Spell 87. In the language of the gods he pronounces, "Down, foulness! I know you, great of head and great of tail, who guard this portal. I know your secret names, Flame Eyes and Spine Crusher. Be still, for I am the justified one, armed with the power of Ra." The effect is immediate. Knowing the demons' true names robs them of power. The colossal snakes recoil, shrinking back against the gateposts and petrifying into mere carved relief once more. The gate groans open with a stone-on-stone rumble, allowing Nacht to step through. His hands tremble, the battle of wills took its toll, but he has passed this test. Beyond the gate, the path winds downward into cavernous halls. The darkness here is alive. Nacht can barely make out the shapes of giant figures looming in the shadows. These are demons, the servants of chaos, lying in wait to test or torment the souls of the dead. One lunges forward, its form half humanoid, half beast, brandishing a blade. In the dim light, for Nacht has conjured a small globe of light by reciting a spell to illumine the dark, the creature's features flash into view. It has the head of a crocodile and the desiccated body of a mummy, and it snarls with hunger. This horror is one of the Duat's executioners, often depicted in tomb illustrations brandishing knives to dismember the damned. With a guttural growl it demands, "Identify yourself, righteous one, or I shall cut your shadow from you." To cut the shadow means to destroy a soul utterly, a threat that would freeze the blood of any living person. But Nacht is armed with righteousness and magic. "I am a servant of Osiris, true of voice before the gods," Nacht cries out, using a declaration taught in his funerary papyrus. He holds up his hand in a gesture of authority, and in it appears an amulet, one of the many buried with him, shaped like the Eye of Horus. The amulet blazes with protective power. The crocodile-headed demon recoils, hissing in frustration as an unseen force halts its advance. The creature's knife clatters to the floor, and with a howl it slinks into the darkness of a side tunnel, thwarted. Nacht presses on, heart pounding. Each confrontation in this underworld forces him to draw upon the arsenal of spells, amulets and virtue he prepared in life. One demon after another looms from the blackness, and each time, by design, there is a spell in the Book of the Dead, or a charm in his wrappings to counter it. He remembers a reassuring truth told to him by an old priest. For every terror in the afterlife, the gods provided a safeguard. Did a giant snake bar the way? There was a spell to slice it into pieces with words of power borrowed from Isis and Ra. Did a lake of fire lie ahead, with flames that could incinerate the unworthy? There were magic words to quench its fire or turn its heat to a gentle breeze. Indeed, after wandering through a maze of caverns, Nacht now faces such a lake, a vast pool of blazing liquid fire blocking his path. Its flames leap up like living creatures, hungry and reaching. The heat is staggering. Even in his non-physical form, Nacht feels the searing danger. Squatting at the lake's fiery shores are 4 baboons with fur of ash and eyes like embers, guardians mentioned in chapter 126 of the Book of the Dead. Their howls fill the air, a cacophony of warning and judgment. This lake of fire is one of the greatest perils on the journey through the Duat. It has a dual nature. To the justified, it can be a source of renewal, burning away impurity, but to the wicked, it is pure destruction, consuming their very souls. Ra himself, the sun god, was said to sail through a lake of fire each night to be reborn by morning, but a human soul must approach it with caution and the correct incantations, lest it be forever obliterated in the flames. Nacht kneels at the edge of the blazing lake and recites the words addressed to these baboon guardians. His voice wavers at first in the scorching heat, but then steadies. "Hail to you, O baboons of the east, who sit in flame. I come before you covered in ma'at. I have not sinned. Let these flames be cool for me and burn me not." The baboons regard him silently with their fiery eyes. In one version of the myth, if a soul is truthful and armed with the right spell, the lake's fire will not harm, but instead empower and purify. And indeed, as Nacht finishes his supplication, the inferno before him parts like a curtain. The flames subside, drawing back to form a glowing path across the surface of the lake. Tentatively, Nacht rises and walks forward, stepping onto the fiery lake as one would step onto solid ground. Each footfall causes a ripple of golden flame around his sandals, but the fire feels no hotter than sun-warmed sand. The baboons, sensing his purity, bow their charred heads. They have recognized him as one who upholds Ma'at, and know the fire will not consume such a soul. Nacht crosses unscathed to the far shore. As he steps off, the lake roars behind him, closing again into a churning cauldron. He does not need the reminder that had he been carrying the weight of terrible sins, this trial might have ended very differently, with his soul writhing and disintegrating in those flames, its existence permanently erased. Every trial in the Duat carries that stark double edge: salvation for the prepared and virtuous, destruction for the ignorant or corrupt. This knowledge keeps Nacht both humble and grateful as he presses on. Hours seem to pass as Nacht journeys through one nightmare after another. In truth, time in the Duat is strange. It might be a single night by the reckoning of the living world, but for him it feels like an eternity of ordeals. He traverses narrow tunnels crawling with serpents, great caverns where mummified ghouls reach out with clawed hands, and islands where hungry ghosts drift like fog, seeking to latch onto any warmth of life force they sense. At each turn, the spells memorized or buried with him act as torches in the dark, illuminating the way or warding off harm. In one cavern, he must solve a riddle posed by 2 towering sphinx-like demons, a puzzle about identifying the sound of one heart beating, to which the answer is silence, indicating he has stilled his passions. By recalling a tale from the Book of Fables he learned in youth, he answers correctly and the sphinxes step aside. In another chamber he drinks from a magical fountain of cool water to restore his strength and memory, as prescribed by spell 68. The water tastes of Nile lotus and instantly clears the fatigue from his mind. It is an epic struggle, a true odyssey of the soul, and it is exactly what the Egyptians expected of the afterlife. They called these trials coming forth by day, for the goal was to emerge at the end of the long night into daylight, reborn. But before that glorious rebirth, every deceased person had to face the terror of the long, dark journey. During one particularly dark stretch of his journey, Nakht is startled by a distant glow illuminating the cavern walls. As he peers from behind a rock formation, he sees a great golden bark moving along a broad river of the Duat in a parallel corridor. It drifts silently, yet the light it casts is intense, pushing back the darkness. Nakht realizes with awe that it is the boat of Ra, the sun god's own ship, making its nightly voyage through the underworld. The bark is crewed by divine figures. He catches glimpses of gods he recognizes from temple art. Perhaps Thoth with his ibis head, perhaps Seth brandishing a spear. Coiled around the boat's deck is a monstrous serpent, Apophis the chaos snake, and even as Nakht watches, the gods on the boat are engaged in battle with it. He sees the figure of Seth hacking at the serpent with a spear, and magic chains cast by Isis's enchantments tightening around the creature's scaly body. The air vibrates with the power of their struggle. Nakht prostrates himself as the bark passes not far from his vantage, a ripple of radiance amid the black waters. For a heartbeat he thinks he sees at the bark's prow the majestic form of Osiris standing alongside Ra, a moment when the soul of the sun god and the soul of the Lord of the Dead unite to renew the cosmos. Indeed, in the darkest hour of the night, Ra merges with Osiris, receiving the power of life from him before dawn. The great bark sails on and soon vanishes behind rocky folds of the Duat, continuing its cosmic route. But Nakht's spirit is buoyed by what he has witnessed. He has seen with his own eyes that the gods themselves traverse this terrifying realm, and they do so successfully, defeating the embodiment of chaos in the process. If Ra can overcome Apophis and bring about a new dawn, then a blessed soul like Nakht, armed with the gods' own spells and protected by their favour, can also overcome the trials of night. The sight of Ra's triumph instills in him a profound reassurance. He is not alone in this fight. The cosmic forces of order are moving alongside him in their own way toward the same goal of rebirth. Finally, after countless challenges that would take far too long to recount in full, Nakht sees a faint light ahead that is not the menacing glow of fire or magic, but a pure white radiance. He realizes he is nearing the end of his journey through darkness. The air grows still. The oppressive presence of demons fades. Instead, there is a solemn atmosphere, like one approaching a great temple. Nakht's footsteps echo on what feels like a floor of polished stone. Pillars emerge from the gloom, and beyond them an immense hall opens up, illuminated by a cool, unwavering light that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. This is the Hall of Two Truths, the grand court of the afterlife. Nakht catches his breath. The hardest part of his odyssey, the part his heart has dreaded and hoped for in equal measure, lies immediately ahead. He steps forward, crossing the threshold into the hall. It is as vast as a cathedral, though its architecture is blurry to his eyes, as if partly made of energy, not stone. In the centre of the space stands a great balance scale, taller than a man. One pan of the scale holds a single white feather that glows with a gentle light, the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth and cosmic order. This ostrich feather is pure and weightless in the physical sense, yet it represents the heaviest of ideals. absolute truth, justice, and harmony. The opposite pan of the scale is empty for now, waiting to receive a heart. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a black basalt throne, is Osiris, lord of the underworld and just judge of the dead. Nacht can barely lift his gaze to meet Osiris's eyes, for the god's presence is overwhelming. Osiris is depicted just as Nacht saw in temple statues, a regal man with green skin, the colour of regeneration, wrapped as a mummy from chest to toe, holding across his chest the crook and flail of kingship. On his head he wears the tall white crown of Upper Egypt, flanked by 2 ostrich feathers. His dark eyes regard Nacht calmly, neither warm nor wrathful, but impassive as a judge who has seen every secret of the human heart. Standing beside Osiris are 2 women, Isis and Nephthys, his devoted wife and sister who often assist in the judging of souls. They are depicted as beautiful goddesses with wings folded at their sides, like attentive angels. At Osiris's feet crouches a monstrous figure, none other than Amit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, the fearsome devourer of the condemned. She pants eagerly, eyes on the empty scale, awaiting a potential meal. Arrayed in a semicircle before the throne are 42 lesser gods, the assessors of Ma'at. These are minor deities, each representing 1 province of Egypt and 1 principle of morality. They are the beings to whom Nacht must proclaim his innocence. Their faces are stern. Some have human form, others have animal heads, a hawk, a jackal, a baboon, a snake. Nacht's soul quails slightly at the sight of them. This silent audience, each a divine auditor of his life's deeds, reminds him that nothing he has ever done was truly secret. In Egyptian belief, even if one got away with a misdeed in life, the 42 would know and hold one accountable here. Nacht becomes aware that someone is standing beside him. It is the god Anubis, in his form as a man with the head of a black jackal. Anubis, the patron of embalming and cemeteries, has been a protector of Nacht from the moment of death. It was priests donning Anubis masks who performed Nacht's mummification. Now the deity stands by the scales as a psychopomp, a guide of souls. Gently, Anubis reaches toward Nacht's chest. By a surreal spiritual process, Anubis draws out Nacht's heart, not the physical heart left in his mummy, but the glowing essence of it, the metaphysical heart that is the seat of his character. In Egyptian thought, this Aib, heart, is the truest record of a person's actions and feelings. It carries all the impressions of one's life. Nacht can see it in Anubis's hands, a glowing heart-shaped light, fluttering slightly as if alive. Anubis places Nacht's heart carefully on the empty scale pan. It is the moment of truth. By this action, it is as though Nacht stands exposed, his inner self laid bare to be measured. All his hopes rest on the idea that this heart has been made light through righteous living and purifications. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods, steps forward with a reed pen and papyrus scroll. He stands ready to record the outcome of the judgment as an eternal, unalterable record. Thoth's bird-like eyes blink at Nacht, not unkindly but analytically. Everything in this hall is formal and heavy with significance. Osiris raises one hand slightly, in a deep, resonant voice that seems to echo from the walls, though his lips do not move visibly. He addresses the trembling soul. "Hear me, O Nacht, who comes before us. You stand in the hall of 2 truths, to have your heart weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If you have been found true of voice, this feather will lift your heart, and you shall be justified. If not, your heart will betray you to the devourer." At these words, Amit lets out a chilling guttural snarl and licks her chops with a reptilian tongue. Nacht feels an icy dread, the kind he'd felt in life only during the worst moments, like when he nearly drowned in a flood as a boy. Anubis now adjusts the scale. The feather of Ma'at, bright and pure, rests on the right pan. Nacht's luminous heart sits on the left. For a long breath, nothing happens. The tension in the hall is immense. Then, almost imperceptibly, Nacht's side of the scale sinks downward, then rises, then sinks again, as if wobbling. Is his heart heavier or lighter? The beam of the scale oscillates, not yet settled, but before a conclusion is reached, Nacht must speak for himself. This is a merciful if daunting aspect of the trial. He is allowed to declare his innocence, to proactively deny wrongdoing in what is called the negative confession or declaration of innocence. Osiris's voice prompts him, "Nacht, the court will hear your words. Do you swear that you have not defiled yourself and the world of the living? Declare your innocence before Ma'at." Nacht's entire life flashes through his mind. This is the culmination of everything. He has prepared for this moment, reciting the formula of denial many times in ritual, hoping that in the end it would be true enough. Stepping forward, though his heart remains on the scale, he addresses the assembly of 42 assessors. One by one, each small deity will expect him to deny a specific sin under their jurisdiction. Traditionally, he should name each by an epithet and then speak his denial. His voice comes out softly at first. "O wide strider who comes from Heliopolis, I have not done evil. O flame eater who comes from Keraha, I have not robbed. O long nose who comes from Hermopolis, I have not stolen. O lion twins who come from the sky, I have not slain any person." With each statement, one of the assessors inclines their head slightly, acknowledging the address. Nacht gains confidence. His voice grows steadier, echoing in the vast hall. "O he whose eyes are in flame who comes from the cavern, I have not told lies. O bone crusher who comes from Arns, I have not caused pain. O flamethrower who comes from Memphis, I have not seized food from the poor. O disturber who comes from the sanctuary, I have not been violent. O he of the two faces who comes from Asyut, I have not been arrogant or blasphemed a god. O heart snatcher who comes from the abyss, I have not taken the milk from the mouths of children. O Lord of Ma'at who comes from Ma'ati, I have not cheated in the fields or in the marketplace. O unseen one who comes from the darkness, I have not eavesdropped or pried into others' matters. O breaker of bones, I have not caused terror. O planter of knives, I have not committed adultery or rape. O sharp eyes, I have not been envious. O fiend who comes from slaughterhouse, I have not been hot-tempered or cursed anyone. O pale one who comes from On, I have not gossiped or prattled too much. O doubly evil, I have not trespassed on others' property. O consumer of shades, I have not abused a servant. O oath-taker, I have not falsely testified. O eater of entrails, I have not slaughtered sacred cattle. O Lord of the Nile, I have not fouled the water. O warden of the sky, I have not been deaf to truth. O Lord of the two horns, I have not stirred up strife. O Nehebkau, I have not acted with insolence. O you gods of justice, I have not done that which Ma'at abhors. I am pure, I am pure, I am pure. Nacht ends by repeating "I am pure" several times, as was customary, to affirm that he has cleansed himself of sin. The silence that follows is profound. In this ritual litany, Nacht has essentially enumerated the moral code of his society, a code not of commandments given by a god, but of sins denied by the soul. Some of the sins he listed may seem minor: prattling, eavesdropping, making someone cry. Others are grave: murder, sacrilege. But all were thought to disrupt Ma'at, the divine order. Thoth, the scribe, has been carefully recording each denial on his papyrus scroll. The assessors of Ma'at exchange glances. Some smile faintly if pleased by a particular denial. Perhaps one or two frown if they doubt, but none raises an objection aloud. It appears Nacht's confession has been accepted, at least provisionally. Anubis now steps forward again to examine the scales. This part is beyond Nacht's ability to influence. The scales have no sympathy or guile. They are a direct physical measure of the weight of truth versus the weight of Nacht's heart. If his heart is heavy with misdeeds, things his confession could not hide, it will sink. If it is light, meaning he truly lived in accordance with Ma'at, it will either balance or rise, proving him justified. Everyone in the hall seems to lean in. Even Osiris sits forward slightly on his throne, and Amit's crocodile tail swishes impatiently. Time stretches taut. Nacht feels a pressure, a gravity, not on his body, but on his soul itself. This is the moment of judgment, the moment that inspired both reverent hope and abject terror in every Egyptian's imagination. The scale's beam, which had been wobbling gently, now levels out. For an instant, it rests perfectly horizontal, a good sign. Then, in a final tremor, the pan with the feather descends just a hair's breadth. Or is it the heart's pan rising? It is so subtle that one cannot tell. Either way, the implication is clear. Nacht's heart is equal to or lighter than the feather of Ma'at. A collective sigh of relief issues from the assembled assessors. Thoth breaks into a broad grin and in a loud, clear voice announces the verdict. Nacht, scribe of the house of life, your heart has been weighed against the feather of Ma'at and found to be true and light. You are declared Ma-Keru, true of voice. You are justified in the eyes of Osiris. As he speaks, he writes the words on his scroll, effectively sealing Nacht's fate as one of the blessed. At this proclamation, Nacht's knees nearly give way. An overwhelming joy and relief floods him. He has passed the ultimate test, not by magic or cunning now, but by the merit of his life's deeds and the purity of his heart. He feels weightless, as if he could fly or glow. In fact, his spirit form does shine a bit brighter now. Osiris stands from his throne, towering but now exuding a gentle warmth. Nacht, who lived in accord with Ma'at, he intones, welcome to your eternity. You have been vindicated by the tribunal of the gods. Approach and receive your blessing. Isis and Nephthys smile at Nacht, like loving aunties. Anubis wags his jackal ears in approval. And poor Amit, the devourer lets out a disappointed grunt, slinking backward into the shadows near the throne. Her chance for a meal is gone. Nacht will not be her food today or any day. One might imagine that, had the scales tipped the other way, Amit would have lunged upon Nacht's heart and gobbled it up in those terrible jaws, condemning his soul to cease to exist. But that nightmare will not come to pass. With humility and gratitude, Nacht steps forward. Osiris reaches out a hand, a green hand emerging from white wrappings, and places it gently on Nacht's bowed head. Be at peace, says Osiris. You shall enter the field of reeds and reside among the blessed, to live forever as an Osiris. Calling someone an Osiris was the highest honour, essentially equating a justified soul with the god of resurrection himself. In that instant, Nacht's Biyah, the bird soul, and Ka, the life force, are reunited by divine grace. He transforms into an ark, an effective and luminous spirit. It is as if a surge of energy flows through him, a second life igniting. The fears that clung to him drop away like shed linen wrappings. He feels strong, whole, and brilliantly alive, more alive, in fact, than he ever felt during his earthly years. Nacht has become what every Egyptian hoped to become after judgment, true of voice, free of the burden of sin, and ready to claim his reward. Thoth nods sagely and says, "It is written." The judgment is formally concluded. The 42 assessors raise their hands in praise to Ma'at and Osiris, acknowledging the just outcome. Somewhere a trumpet-like sound, perhaps a priestly fanfare, echoes, signalling that another soul has been admitted to the company of the blessed dead. A door that Nacht had not noticed, a grand set of double doors at the far end of the hall, now swings open. Beyond it is pure, welcoming daylight. Osiris gestures towards it. "Go forth, Nacht," he says. "Go forth by day into your new life. Behold, the field of reeds awaits you." Heart overflowing with happiness, Nacht gives a deep bow to the gods. Thank you, great ones," he manages to say, voice trembling with emotion. There are tears of joy on his face, though his spiritual body has no physical eyes to weep with. Accompanied by a gentle nudge from Anubis, a congratulatory pat on the back, almost, Nacht steps through the portal of light, leaving the Hall of Judgment behind. Beyond the doors of the Hall of Two Truths lies a realm of soft sunlight and eternal morning, the paradise the Egyptians called Seket Aru, the field of reeds. As Nacht crosses the threshold, a landscape unveils itself that makes him gasp in wonder. It is as if he has emerged back into Egypt, but an Egypt perfected, an Egypt that never knows drought or pain, only abundance and peace. He stands on the banks of a broad river, shimmering under a golden sky. The air is sweet and warm. Gentle breezes stir the reeds that line the waterways, and their rustling is like a whisper of welcome. The field of reeds spreads out in all directions, a patchwork of lush green islands crisscrossed by channels of clear water. There are date palms laden with fruit, and sycamore trees, the sacred trees often said to provide shade and nourishment to the blessed, creating dappled patterns of light on the ground. Farther off, Nacht sees low hills with cascading streams and fields of wheat that gleam like gold in the sunlight. It is an idyllic, pastoral scene, familiar yet unmarred by any imperfection. Nacht feels a new substance under his feet, not the dust of the tomb or the rock of the caverns, but soft, rich earth and vibrant grass. He realizes he is standing at the threshold of his own eternal estate. In Egyptian belief, every blessed soul was granted a plot of the field of reeds, essentially a heavenly farm where one could live much as one did on earth, but free from want or worry. Looking down, Nacht notices his form. During judgment, he had appeared as a wraith or baybird. Now he finds he has a solid human appearance again. What's more, he appears as he did in the prime of life, perhaps around 30 years old, hale and hearty. The cuts and arthritis that bothered him in old age are gone. The thick hair of his youth crowns his head once more. He is dressed in fine white linen, spotless and untattered. Some say the shroud one was buried in becomes one's shining attire in paradise. In short, he looks and feels whole and healthy, the best version of himself. No sooner has he taken in these marvels than a sound reaches his ears that makes his heart leap, for though his heart was weighed, symbolically he still has a heart in this new form, an emotional core that rejoices now. It is the sound of laughter and voices, familiar voices. Turning, Nacht sees a small group of people running toward him along the riverbank, waving. Leading them is a woman with a graceful figure and shining eyes. It is his wife, Anhai, who died some years before him. He recognizes her instantly, though she too is restored to youthful beauty. Behind her are two men. One is Nakt's father, the kindly old fisherman who had passed away decades earlier, now looking vigorous. The other is Nakt's elder brother, who died as a child, now grown into the man he never got to be. And there, peeping from behind his wife's skirt, is a little girl, their daughter who succumbed to a fever at age 5, now healthy and playful. A sob of joy breaks from Nacht's throat as he runs to meet them. They embrace fiercely under the soft light of paradise. No words are needed at first, only laughter and tears and the warmth of reunion. In this perfect world, no one is sick, no one is in pain, not even emotional pain, for sorrow itself has been left behind with mortality. The family is together again, and the long years of separation seem like a distant bad dream. This is the ultimate reward the Egyptians envisioned, not an abstract communion with a god or dissolution into cosmic oneness, though becoming one with gods was part of it too, but very tangibly a continuation of life with loved ones in a land that was essentially Egypt without any of Egypt's hardships. For Nakt, in this moment, all the striving and fear, the meticulous preparations, have been vindicated. After the first joy of reunion ebbs into a calm happiness, Nakt's wife takes his hand and begins to show him around. "Come," she says, "see the home I have made for us." She leads him along a path lined with flowers, lotus blooms and turquoise-coloured papyrus blossoms. In the field of reeds, even the papyrus, which is normally green, can have fantastical hues. They arrive at a charming little house situated under a sycamore tree by a canal. The house looks much like their old one in Thebes, but improved. The walls are painted with bright murals, the granary is full to bursting, and a gentle cow is tied up by the fence, a divine cow that presumably produces endless milk. A small boat is moored at a private dock, ready for leisure trips along the waterways. In the backyard, Nakt sees plots of tilled land. To his amazement, there are already crops sprouting, barley and emmer wheat. "Every day here is perfect for growing," his father explains with a broad grin. "The harvests come in abundantly, 3 times a day if you wish. We've been tending your field awaiting your arrival." Nakt even spots little clay Shabti figures, the servant figurines that were buried with him, now walking and working autonomously in the fields, hoeing and carrying water. It seems the magical spell on them, spell 6, which animates Shabti to do labour, is in effect. Whenever farm work needs to be done in this paradise, the Shabtis will do it for him, so he can relax or attend to more pleasant tasks. But many of the blessed want to do some work, because here, work is not onerous. It's a joy to sow and reap when the land yields generously and there is no backache or exhaustion. Nakt's brother proudly shows off a plot where he planted lettuce and cucumbers. They are already ripe, and he picks some to offer as a welcome snack. Nakt is almost overwhelmed by the simple pleasures being offered. His wife pours him beer from a jug. The beer here is always fresh, rich, and does not make one ill, no matter how much is drunk. She breaks a loaf of bread, always warm, baked from divine grain. Nakt bites into it, and it tastes better than any feast he had in life, partly because it's imbued with the spice of contentment, partly because in life food often had the edge of hunger or worry to it. But here there is no anxiety, only enjoyment. Indeed, in the field of reeds, all the best aspects of physical existence continue without the negatives. One can eat and drink, but never to painful excess and never out of need, only for delight. One can rest under the sycamore's shade, but not out of exhaustion, only for pleasure. There is music too. Across the water, Nakt hears the pleasant chords of a lute, and the chiming of sistra, ritual rattles. He sees a boat drifting by where a group of blessed souls are having a little celebration, perhaps reenacting the jolly boat rides they loved on the Nile during feast days. Here, every day can be a feast day if one desires. The environment also responds to wishes. The text described the field of reeds as a place where whatever you desire, it appears. If Nacht wants to go fishing, the river will offer itself and fish will practically jump into his hands. If he wants to travel, there are gateways that lead to other celestial realms, to visit a temple of the gods or roam the stars. Communication is unimpeded. Nacht finds he can speak without moving his lips and be heard, and he can hear the thoughts of others if they wish to share them. It's a world of intuitive, harmonious connection. He notices something else remarkable. In the sky above, which is perpetually blue and pleasant, there is a second sun as well as the familiar one. One sun is Ra, making his daytime journey across, but another smaller sun is the reflection of Ra travelling through the underworld. In other words, the laws of physics are more fluid here. Day and night coexist in balance so that time is ever present. That said, the Egyptians did conceive of doing activities in a sequence even in paradise. They spoke of morning in the field of reeds, spent tending and walking, afternoons feasting, evenings perhaps in gentle merriment, and the cycle repeats without decay or fatigue. Time exists as a comforting rhythm, not as a road to aging or death. Indeed, Egyptians had many poetic ways to describe the blessed state. They often referred to the worthy dead as Ak, shining, effective spirits, which they envisioned as star-like lights twinkling in the night sky. Pharaohs in the pyramid texts were promised a place among the imperishable stars that never set, joining the circumpolar constellations to shine forever. Common people, too, found comfort in thinking that a beloved parent or friend, once justified, might become a star watching over the living. So, as Nacht gazes up, he is aware that he and his family are now among those shining Aku. If someone on earth looks up at the night sky, one of those stars could be him, a beacon of hope to those still living. The Ark was believed to have the freedom to roam the cosmos. Nacht senses this freedom tingling within him. If he wishes, he could travel with Ra in his solar bark by day, sailing across the sky to see the world of the living below. By night, he could join the stars or accompany the moon god on his voyage. He also knows that he can return to Earth at will, perhaps to visit his tomb or check on descendants. Many Egyptians believed that the dead could appear in dreams or as invisible guardians to help their family. Now Nacht understands how that is possible. He feels that connection still alive. In the field of reeds, he has a home base of joy and plenty when he is not wandering. The afterlife for the justified is not a static existence of cloud-sitting or endless idol worship. It is an active, vibrant second life with the ability to experience the best of existence on earth, sky, and underworld alike. This liberation, to travel anywhere, to be in control of one's happiness, and to never fear death again, is the ultimate answer to all the fears that had weighed upon him in life. The long night of danger has given way to an eternal dawn of peace. As he walks with his wife and family along the water's edge in this paradise, perhaps Nacht reflects for a moment on how different this outcome might have been had he not prepared, had he not lived decently, or had he not been afforded proper burial. Such thoughts likely deepen his gratitude, and indeed in the fields beyond there are figures who wander alone, not partaking in joy. These might be souls who did not pass the judgment, spirits who have been exiled to dreary corners or left hungry because no one remembers them. But those unfortunate ones are far away and few. The field of reeds is for the vast majority of souls who were given rights and tried to uphold Ma'at. At this point, one of the gods, perhaps the goddess Hathor, Lady of Love, or Ma'at herself with her feather crown, passes by Nakt's little party. They greet her with cheers and joyful reverence. It's said Hathor often strolls through the field of reeds, pouring refreshing drinks for the blessed and playing music on her sistrum to add to the merriment. Here, the presence of the deities is not fearful. The gods mingle freely with righteous souls. Osiris might hold court in a splendid pavilion where souls can come pay respects or seek counsel. The sun god Ra daily visits to illuminate the fields, which is why it's always pleasant daylight here. The boundaries between mortal and divine are so thin that the deceased can speak to the gods almost as neighbours, and the gods treat them with kindness as members of their eternal community. For Nakt, and for all souls who reach this blessed shore, the story could end here in bliss and contentment. This was the final vision that drove the Egyptians in life, a world beyond the world, where the righteous would live again in a state of perfection. All the fear, all the toil, all the careful rituals were aimed at securing this outcome, and when it is achieved, as it is for Nakt now, it vindicates every effort 100-fold. Thus we have followed an Egyptian soul from the darkness of the tomb, through the gauntlet of the underworld, into the sunrise of paradise. It has been a cinematic journey, full of perils overcome and truths affirmed. But to truly grasp why the Egyptians feared the afterlife so deeply, we must step back and look at the world of the living that created such beliefs. The story of Nakt's soul is, of course, an idealized narrative drawn from countless inscriptions and papyri. Real Egyptians spent their whole lives anticipating that journey, and it profoundly affected how they lived, built, and worshipped. We have seen what they feared: chaos, judgment, second death, and how they hoped to overcome it. Now let's examine why these ideas held such power over the Egyptian mind, and how fear and hope coexisted in their culture. Back in the bright land of the living along the fertile banks of the Nile, the shadow of death was never far from mind. But it was not a morbid obsession, it was, paradoxically, a motive for grand achievement and a source of meaning. The same people who loved life, who sang love songs to their sweethearts and delighted in the taste of beer at a festival, were quietly, steadily preparing for a journey more important than any earthly expedition. One might say that every stone the Egyptians lifted, every ritual they performed, and every law they upheld had an eye toward the afterlife. The fear of what awaited beyond the final breath drove them to feats of devotion and engineering that still astonish us today. Consider the great pyramids rising from the Giza plateau, enormous triangular mountains of stone that have stood for over 4,500 years. These were not merely grand monuments, they were resurrection machines designed to ensure a pharaoh's safe passage to eternity. Pharaohs and their architects conceived the pyramid as a means for the king's soul to ascend to the heavens. Its apex pointed toward the undying stars. Building one was a colossal undertaking. Khufu's Great Pyramid, for instance, contains around 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing as much as an elephant, painstakingly aligned to cardinal directions. Why marshal so much of Egypt's wealth and manpower for a tomb? Because the king, and by extension his kingdom, could not risk the king's afterlife failing. If the king's soul did not reach the sky to commune with the gods, who would intercede for the land? If his body decayed or fell into enemy hands, it could spell not just personal doom, but cosmic disorder. Inside the pyramids, deep in hidden chambers, the walls were engraved with the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings from Egypt. These texts are among the earliest guidebooks to the afterlife. They boldly proclaim, as in the tomb of King Unis, "Ho, Unis, you have not gone away dead. You have gone away alive. Sit on Osiris's throne, with your baton in your arm, and govern the living." Such spells reinforced the affirmation that the pharaoh would live eternally and continue to rule in the hereafter. This was not just pious comfort, it was a statement of national ideology. The death of a pharaoh was potentially a crisis, and the pyramid texts, full of prayers, passwords and power words, were aimed at beating back the chaos inherent in that moment. They are frank in their fear. There are also texts pleading with the gods not to let the king die the second death, and to protect him from any harm as he ascends. As centuries passed, the Egyptians refined and expanded their afterlife beliefs. Tombs evolved in form. By the New Kingdom's circa 1500 BCE, pharaohs no longer built conspicuous pyramids, which were magnets for tomb robbers. Instead, they cut secret tombs deep into the valley of the king's cliffs, hoping to hide their resting places. But if the outward form changed, the fervour for preparation did not. Inside these rock-cut tombs, such as the splendid tomb of Pharaoh Seti I, corridors and chambers were completely covered with intricate paintings and texts describing the netherworld. Whole new compositions appeared: the Book of the Amduat, that which is in the Duat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, and others, each giving detailed maps and descriptions of the stages the king's soul would pass through during the 12 hours of night. Ceiling paintings depicted the goddess Nut arching over, swallowing the sun in the evening and birthing it at dawn, symbolic assurance of rebirth. When explorers in modern times, like Giovanni Belzoni in 1817, first entered these royal tombs, they were stunned by the sheer volume of spiritual literature on the walls. Belzoni in Seti III's tomb found what he called a beautiful and strange tableau, hundreds of figures of gods, serpents and spirits, accompanied by hieroglyphic captions, essentially a graphic novel of the king's journey with Ra through the night and his union with Osiris. This was all placed there to literally guide the king's soul. One can imagine the pharaoh, in spirit form, moving through his dark tomb, but with the walls lighting the way like an instruction manual or a protective spell matrix. Such intense focus on the afterlife in royal tombs was driven partly by fear that even a misstep could doom the king, and partly by the hope that knowledge is power, that if you knew the names and forms of everything you'd meet, you would master them. The Egyptians spared no expense in these preparations. To give a concrete sense of the scale, when Tutankhamun's tomb, a relatively small royal tomb, was discovered intact in 1922, it contained over 5,000 items meticulously packed for his afterlife. There were golden beds, royal chariots dismantled and stored, dozens of jars of perfumed oils and wines, cases of dried meat and bread, stacks of linen clothing, games for entertainment, statues of protective deities to guard each doorway, and 413 Shabti figurines ready to work as servants. This boy king, who died around age 18, entered the afterlife with more supplies than most families accumulate in a lifetime. It underscores how seriously the Egyptians took provisioning for eternity. None of these were mere tokens. They earnestly believed Tutankhamun would use them. The best of earthly life was packed up to accompany him: art, comfort, food, tools. That the living were willing to bury such wealth, treasures of gold and precious gems beyond use on earth, shows that they valued the king's successful afterlife even above their present prosperity. In their calculus, those riches would do far more good helping the king rally to protect Egypt from the beyond than they would sitting in palaces. But afterlife preparation was not the province of kings alone. Over time, the privilege of an afterlife became democratized in Egypt. In the distant past of the Old Kingdom, only pharaohs had the sacred pyramid texts carved in their tombs, inscriptions which boldly declare, for example, "O King Unis, you have not gone away dead, you have gone away alive." The prevailing idea in that early period seems to have been that the pharaoh, being divine, was guaranteed an afterlife in the sky, whereas the common people's spirits were more shadowy or confined to their graves. However, by the end of the Old Kingdom, and especially in the Middle Kingdom, circa 2000 BCE, nobles and even non-royal people began to equip their burials with similar texts. These became known as the coffin texts, since they were often written on the inside of coffins. They were essentially a localized, updated version of the pyramid texts, adapted so that anyone could use them. This tells us that Egyptians had come to believe, or at least hope, that not only the king but all human souls would face judgment and could achieve bliss if properly prepared. By the New Kingdom circa 1500 to 1100 BCE, the process was fully open to all who could afford it. The famous Book of the Dead, actually called the Book of Coming Forth by Day, was produced as a papyrus scroll that many people, not just royals, placed in their tombs. Scribes and artisans in bustling workshops of Thebes or Memphis made standardized versions of these scrolls, often leaving blanks for the customer's name to be filled in. For a fee, you could buy a ready-made guide to your afterlife. No longer was eternal life the king's exclusive privilege. Every heart would be weighed. Every soul had the chance to reach the field of reeds with proper preparation. Naturally, an entire industry grew around death and burial to serve this demand. In the sprawling necropolises west of the Nile, one could find tomb makers selling plots of tomb chapels, sculptors carving statues to house one's car, and scribes offering to write out a selection of helpful spells. There were workshops for funerary furniture, from gilded coffins to simple clay offering trays. Even peasants might save up to afford a single protective amulet or a wooden heart scarab to be buried with them. In the town of Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built the king's tombs, we find that these workers, who were not rich, nonetheless invested considerable time in creating beautifully decorated tombs for themselves and their families. Their tombs had miniature books of the dead painted on the walls or on their coffins. They show scenes of the tomb owner standing before Osiris, or sailing in a boat in the afterlife, very much like the pharaoh's imagery, indicating that these hopes and fears permeated all levels of society. A poor farmer might not afford a grand limestone tomb, but he could still have his children say prayers over his body, or have a few verses from a funerary spell inked on his shroud. The practical aspects of preparation for death were a regular part of Egyptian life. Families would secure a tomb site ideally long before it was needed. In hieroglyphs, one's tomb was often called the House of Eternity. They would decorate it with autobiographical texts to plead their virtues, and offering scenes. They commissioned coffin makers, purchased amulets. Dozens of amulets were typically sewn into a mummy's wrappings, and stored jars of dried foods and precious oils to place in the tomb. It was common to keep a death box at home containing objects one would need in the grave, perhaps a favourite comb or a clay vessel painted with a prayer. Far from being morbid, these practices gave people comfort. They felt proactive in securing their own survival. Central to all preparation was the process of mummification, an art and science the Egyptians perfected over centuries, driven by the belief that preserving the body was essential to the soul's survival. The rationale was straightforward. The soul, especially the ka and br, needed a sound vessel to return to, a familiar home base if it was to last forever. Decay was the enemy, a physical manifestation of chaos. Thus, when someone died, embalmers would swiftly begin the work of rescuing the body from corruption. Imagine the scene at the Pernefer, the House of Beauty, which was the euphemistic name for the embalming workshop. It's a structure of open air, likely a courtyard near the edge of the desert, for the dry environment and privacy from the towns. Here, on a special wooden table, lies the body of Nakt, back when he first died. Around him stand men in clean white linen aprons. One wears a jackal-headed mask, impersonating Anubis, to sanctify the proceedings with the god's presence. This ritual role is crucial. It's as though Anubis himself is presiding over the preservation of the deceased. They begin by ritually purifying the body. Water from the Nile, symbolic of the life-giving flood, is poured over Nakt's hair and skin. The lead embalmer recites, "Cleansed is Nakt, born of merit, cleansed of all impurity that he may rise anew." They then open the body, a necessary but ritually dangerous act. One of the embalmers makes an incision in the left side of the abdomen with an obsidian or bronze blade. Immediately, other priests begin a scripted wailing and cursing, not directed at the corpse but at the cutter. This is part of the ritual. The man who cuts the body symbolically takes on a blame, since cutting a body is a violation of wholeness, so he is chased briefly and pelted with natron, as if to expel any malign forces the act attracted. It's a controlled drama to safeguard the sanctity of the deceased. Through the incision, they carefully remove the internal organs: stomach, intestines, lungs, liver. Each organ is handled with reverence. They will be individually treated, wrapped, and placed in 4 canopic jars whose lids bear the likenesses of 4 gods: the sons of Horus, Imseti, Hapi, Duamutef, Kebersenuef, who protect them. The heart notably is left inside the body. As we've seen, it must remain to be judged. The brain, conversely, is considered unimportant for intellect. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of thought. So a long hooked tool is inserted up through the nostrils to liquefy and withdraw the brain. It's a procedure that modern minds find gruesome, but for the embalmers it's standard and necessary. The brain, if left, would rot and could cause the head to collapse. Once the body is emptied of decay-prone organs, they rinse the cavity with palm wine, a disinfectant, and pack it with small linen bags of natron salt. They cover the entire body with natron as well. Nakt's corpse is then laid out on a slanted table so fluids can drain. Over the next 40 days or so, the natron will desiccate the body, essentially turning it into a human-shaped dry relic, halting decomposition. During these 40 days, the family of the deceased continues to mourn and also prepare for the funeral. They commission the coffin, perhaps have a portrait mask made, gather grave goods, and invite relatives to the upcoming ceremonies. After the designated period, the classical sources say 70 days total from death to burial, which aligns roughly with a symbolic period. Some link it to the star Sirius's disappearance and reappearance in the sky. The embalmers return to the body. It is now much changed. The skin is shrunken, the features gaunt and leathery, but it no longer smells of decay. It smells of salt and the faint perfumes of the wine. They remove the salt and gently wash the body again. Now comes the restoration and wrapping phase. The embalmers anoint Nakt's body with sacred oils and resins, substances like myrrh, frankincense, cedar oil, and lotus essence. These not only help preserve the skin by moisturizing it and having antibacterial properties, but also impart a divine fragrance. The smell of these balms was associated with the gods, sometimes called the scent of eternity. One could say the mummy is being transformed into an image of Osiris, who was called Lord of Myrrh. The skin, though shrunken, is rubbed to give it a lifelike pliability in places. Sunken areas are sometimes packed with linens or false eyes, added to the face to restore a natural appearance. During wrapping, each limb and finger is wrapped separately at first. The embalmers use long, thin strips of linen, often linen recycled from old clothes or temple offerings. There is an economy even in piety. As they wrap, another priest reads spells aloud. For example, when wrapping the legs, "Your legs are wrapped in the protection of Neith. You may walk to eternity." When wrapping the arms, "Your arms are the arms of Osiris. They will embrace your loved ones again." Each layer of bandages might be brushed with resins to glue them in place and add an antimicrobial seal. They intersperse amulets within the layers. Over the heart, an embalmer places the green stone scarab that Nacht's wife commissioned, inscribed with spell 30b. "O my heart of my mother, do not stand against me as a witness. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. Do not you cause my name to stink before the judges." This heart scarab will ensure Nacht's heart stays silent at judgment and does not blurt out any guilt. Other amulets, a tiny golden Djed pillar, symbol of stability, is placed at the spine. A band inscribed with chapter 159, spell for not perishing, is tied around the neck, an Eye of Horus amulet over the incision to magically heal it, and dozens more, ankhs, Isis knots, falcons, all with protective spells. Each amulet is like a battery storing magic to be released when needed. After layer upon layer of wrapping, the mummy is nearly complete. The head is wrapped with special care so that the facial features maintain some contour. Often they place a funerary mask over the head at this stage. For royalty and the wealthy, this mask might be made of gold and inlaid with precious stones. King Tutankhamun's mask being the prime example, a glorious visage to present to the gods. For others, painted cartonnage, layers of linen and papyrus stiffened with plaster, forms a portrait of the deceased, eyes open and radiant. The idea is that this mask or the painted coffin lid will serve as the public face of the deceased's spirit, not just for recognition by the soul, but to interact with the living who come to the tomb. Finally, the entire body is cocooned in a large linen shroud and secured with linen strips. The embalmers declare that Nacht is now an Osiris, effectively canonizing him among the blessed. He is no longer just a dead man. He is the Osiris Nacht, true of voice. On a ritual level, they have reenacted the myth of Osiris. His body was dismembered and decayed, but then reassembled, resurrected and wrapped in linen to be made whole for eternity. When the day of the funeral arrives, Nacht's family and community conduct elaborate ceremonies to send him off properly. The mummy is placed in a coffin, sometimes a series of nested coffins, and a stone sarcophagus for extra protection. The procession moves from the house of embalming to the tomb site, crossing the Nile to the West Bank, if necessary, West being the land of the dead. There is music, perhaps a band of flutists and drummers, to announce the coming of the deceased. There are mourners, sometimes professional women, who wail and throw dust on their hair to mimic the goddesses Isis and Nephthys's mourning for Osiris, thereby sacralizing the grief. Nacht's wife and children partake in this, crying loudly to show their love. In Egyptian culture, loud mourning was considered proper. A quiet funeral would mean the person wasn't cherished. Along the route, priests perform rituals at intervals. One common rite involved incensing the mummy with burning frankincense and myrrh. To purify and also symbolically feed the ka, spirits consume the scent of food and incense. They also sprinkle milk and water, symbols of rebirth. Think of mother's milk and the life-giving Nile. Upon reaching the tomb's entrance, the most critical rite takes place, the opening of the mouth ceremony. In this ritual, a priest, often the heir of the deceased, maybe Nakt's eldest son if he has one, uses a special adze tool to touch the mummy's mouth, eyes and ears. He recites, "Your mouth is opened by Ta, your mouth is opened by Sokar, as was done for Osiris." They touch the instrument to Nakht's lips, enabling him to speak and breathe, to his eyes, enabling him to see, to his ears, enabling him to hear. Symbolically, this reanimates the senses that death sealed. Nakht's mummy, through this rite, is given the power to perceive and partake in the afterlife. They even present offerings to the face of the mummy at this point, a leg of ox, a loaf of bread, a jar of beer, and encourage him to inhale. "May your mouth be opened, may you taste eternity." This is a moment of profound hope, effectively saying, you are now alive again in the next world. You can eat, drink, speak, and your body is yours to command. The fear that the dead might be helpless is answered by this empowering ritual. With that final ceremony complete, Nakht's mummy is ready to be laid to rest. They carry the coffin into the tomb chamber, set it on its prepared bier. All around, the tomb is furnished with what he will need. Servants, or relatives acting as servants, arrange the food offerings: baskets of bread, cakes, onions, dates, dried fish, jars of beer and wine. Personal possessions are there too. Nakht's writing palette and brushes, for he might want to continue writing or record keeping in the afterlife, his reed sandals, his favourite chair. The Shabti box is placed prominently so Nakht can call upon those little figurines to work the fields of paradise for him. The canopic chest containing his organs is set under the protection of a statue of Anubis, or a painted image of the goddess Neith, to watch over those vital pieces. The walls of the tomb chamber are his silent companions. They are adorned with painted scenes and texts, chosen carefully to support him. On one wall, a beautiful rendition of Nakht and his wife, sitting in a garden, enjoying a meal under a pergola covered in grapevines, an ideal scene meant to come true in the field of reeds. On another wall, a depiction of Nakht standing before Osiris and a tribunal of gods, hands raised in praise, while a scale weighs his heart against a feather, and Thoth records the result. The desired result of a balanced scale is shown, anticipating the favourable verdict. Beneath that scene are written portions of chapter 125, the negative confession, so that Nakht's spirit can recall the words if needed during the real judgment. By decorating the tomb with these images and words, the Egyptians believed they were effectively programming the space with magic. Hieroglyphs were not static to them. Writing the offering formula, an offering which the king gives, actually made those offerings perpetually available. Painting servants or crops on the wall meant the tomb would have a supernatural supply of labour and food. Some tomb paintings show bread and beer literally painted, a substitute for endless real offerings. A false door carved in the tomb's chapel allowed the car to travel between worlds. Tomb inscriptions often address the living, asking them to speak the deceased's name or pour out water, so that the deceased spirit might benefit. Being remembered was as important to the Egyptians as it is to us today, and even more so because memory in their belief was nourishment. To be forgotten was to starve and to truly die. With everything in place, the tomb is sealed. The mourners say their final earthly goodbyes, though they remind themselves it is not truly final. Until we meet again in the west, they might whisper. The heavy stone door or blocking wall is shut, enclosing Nacht in darkness once more, but this time he is fortified by love, ritual, and everything he could need. The living depart into the sunlight, their faces tear-streaked, but also relieved, knowing they did all they could for their beloved. The story from here we have already traced with Nacht's soul, and we saw how, indeed, every amulet and every spell played its role. Without the heart scarab and spell 30b, perhaps Nacht's heart might have betrayed him. Without the negative confession, perhaps the gods would have had to guess his worth rather than hear it affirmed. Without the Shabtis, perhaps he would have had to labour in the fields of paradise instead of enjoying them. To the Egyptians, these were not superfluous, they were essential tools, just as one wouldn't embark on a dangerous voyage without provisions and maps. Even after burial, the role of the living in appeasing their fear of the afterlife did not cease. The family of the deceased would continue to care for his soul by presenting offerings at his tomb. The tomb chapel, an outer room accessible to the living, was a place of regular visitation. On the beautiful festival of the valley, for example, a yearly Theban festival of the dead, families would ferry across the Nile to the West Bank necropolis, carrying bouquets of flowers and baskets of food. They spent the night in tomb courtyards, eating and drinking in honour of the deceased, singing songs to the mummy within, effectively inviting their lost loved ones to join in the feast. They believed the dead could and did join them, partaking of the essence of the food and drink left out. It was a joyous reunion across the veil, a ritual that affirmed hope over fear, reminding everyone that the bonds of family endured beyond death. The living shared stories and celebrated, while the dead in return were expected to bless and watch over the living. Such scenes, far from being spooky, were ones of familial love and continuity. On a more everyday level, Egyptians might pour a libation of water at the tomb while saying a formula. May water be given to you, cool water to your car. They offered small loaves of bread and salt, or burned incense, believing the deceased spirit would consume the spiritual essence of these offerings to sustain itself. They performed these rites not just out of duty, but out of genuine fear of the alternative. If the deceased's car was not fed, it might suffer hunger and become restless or angry. This was the dreaded fate of a neglected soul, to roam as a ghost, called Mut or Ikem, lamenting its lot. In Egyptian letters to the dead that have been found, the living sometimes write to an unhappy ghost of a relative, apologizing for any lapse and promising to bring more offerings if only the ghost stops causing trouble. Such correspondence reveals the anxiety Egyptians had about keeping their dead relatives content, a very specific fear that the afterlife could become unpleasant for someone if the living failed in their duties. There's a poignant ghost story from the New Kingdom. A high priest of Amun named Konsuemhab encounters the restless spirit of a man who died generations earlier. This ghost, Niut Nob, says, "I have no one to pour water for me, and my tomb was destroyed. I am hungry and thirsty and in anguish." The high priest, moved by the ghost's plight, and perhaps a bit scared of the ghost's power, promises to find his tomb and restore it, to inscribe his name anew so he won't be forgotten. This story shows how seriously they took the idea that a soul could be left in limbo if their tomb was damaged or their memory lost. To an Egyptian, few things were more tragic than that. It meant the person's afterlife was in jeopardy, or at least miserable. Tomb inscriptions sometimes doubled as warnings to the living. They threatened those who would interfere with the burial or fail in their obligations. Often these warnings have a legal tone. Any who would damage this tomb the council will punish. The gods will not accept him. Notably, many of them specifically invoke afterlife consequences. A tomb of an official might warn, "As for anyone who shall enter this tomb in impurity, I shall seize him in the council of the dead. I shall deprive him of his worldly position and of his afterlife's bread." Another tomb from the New Kingdom declares, "He who would damage my tomb or violate it, Hathor will deny him water, and Horus will deny him air, and his soul shall be destroyed." These are not idle curses. They are targeted at what an Egyptian violator would fear: losing their own afterlife offerings, losing descendants to honor them, and ultimately annihilation of the soul. One stark historical example of the Egyptians using afterlife denial as a punishment is the fate of Prince Pentawere, a son of Rameses III. In 1155 BC, Pentawere was implicated in a harem conspiracy to assassinate his father. The coup failed, and Pentaware's sentence was to take his own life, likely by poison. But worse, from an Egyptian perspective, he was denied a proper burial. His body, discovered in modern times as Unknown Man E, was not embalmed normally. It was found covered in a crude goat skin, a ritually unclean material, with no removal of organs, no carefully wrapped linen, mouth gaping in what looks like a scream. He was essentially buried as an outcast, without the ceremonies to secure his soul. For a prince of Egypt to be treated this way shows how severe his punishment was. They deliberately tried to cut him off from eternity. The ancient papyrus that recounts the trial notes that Pentawere was found guilty and made to take his own life, and although it doesn't describe the burial, the mummy itself tells the tale. To the Egyptians, this was truly a fate worse than death. It was an official damnation. They couldn't, in their justice system, torture someone's soul in an afterlife hell, but they could do the equivalent by refusing them burial rites and thus condemning them to oblivion. Similarly, we know that some pharaohs, like Thutmose III late in his reign, had the names and images of certain predecessors, notably Hatshepsut, his stepmother, chiselled off monuments, an act likely aimed at condemning her to oblivion as well. Erasing her name and picture was meant to disrupt her memory and offerings, effectively killing her soul a second time. These measures were rare and extreme, but they underline how serious the idea of no afterlife was to the Egyptian psyche. To threaten someone with the loss of their eternity was the ultimate punishment. On the flip side, fear of that terrible outcome drove the living to moral behavior and piety. Egyptian religion was not just about temple rituals. It was deeply ethical, in large part because of the doctrine of the weighing of the heart. People grew up with the understanding that their actions in life would literally be weighed and could tip the balance between eternal joy or eternal ruin. This instilled a sort of internalized moral compass. Did every Egyptian live morally? Certainly not, any more than any society has complete compliance. But their ideal was clear. Wisdom texts and instructions, a popular genre in ancient Egypt, hammered home principles of Ma'at as the guideline for a good life and a favourable judgment. For instance, the instruction of Ptahhotep, written around 2350 BCE by a vizier as advice to his son, warns against greed. Beware of covetousness, which is a grave illness with no cure. It estranges father from mother and brother from brother. It splits a wife from her husband. It is an evil that makes sweet friendship bitter. Covetousness was seen as something that would weigh down the heart. In the negative confession we heard earlier, one of the declarations was, "I have not been covetous." In the instruction of Ani, a New Kingdom text, it is written, "Annex not the land of others by force. The evil man often comes to ruin." Let him be who he is. God shall judge him in the end. There is a distinct sense that even if earthly courts fail, divine justice in the hall of Ma'at will prevail. Many tombs of non-royal individuals feature autobiographical inscriptions that read like legal defences or moral resumes. An official might carve on his stela, "I gave bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothes to the naked. I was a father to the orphan, a husband to the widow. I did not take the property of anyone unjustly. I did not take bribes. I am one who loved Ma'at and hated Isfet, chaos." One could almost see these as the individual preemptively speaking to the 42 judges via the tomb wall, hoping that by broadcasting his virtue, he reinforces it in reality. Even if it's idealized after all, who would openly admit their sins on a tomb? The fact that this is what people wanted to claim shows what the society valued and feared lacking. They feared being judged immoral, so they put tremendous effort into moral self-presentation, and we can assume at least some genuine effort into moral behavior. It's fascinating that in Egypt, unlike some later religions, morality wasn't dictated by an external punishment shock reward system alone, but tied intimately to the concept of balance. If you were bad, your heart simply would be heavy and you'd sort of self-select into destruction. If you were good, your heart would be light and you'd float into paradise. Fear of judgment thus drove not only personal virtue but also the societal expectation of Ma'at in governance. Pharaohs were expected to uphold Ma'at by caring for their people and temples. They were called beloved of Ma'at. The whole cosmic order, the sun rising, the Nile flooding on time, was tied to the king performing Ma'at daily. They even had ceremonies where the pharaoh would symbolically cut down reeds or kill a cow representing chaos, to show he was actively combating disorder. This intertwining of cosmic order and personal ethics meant that Egyptians saw their entire universe as a delicate balance between stability and chaos. The afterlife journey and the judgment scene are microcosms of that worldview, a balance scale, order versus disorder, feather versus sinful heart. And it is easy to understand why the prospect of tipping the wrong way inspired such fear. It wasn't just about personal annihilation, it was also seen as cosmic failure, a breach of the fundamental principle that gave life meaning. While fear was a motivator, it worked in tandem with hope. In fact, it's accurate to say their fear of the afterlife reflected a deep desire for justice, continuity, and meaning. They feared judgment precisely because they fervently wanted the universe to be just. They wanted to believe that the good would be rewarded and the evil punished. They feared non-existence because they so loved existence. The warmth of the sun, the smell of lotus blossoms, the laughter of children, the sound of the Nile's waters, that losing all that forever was the worst outcome imaginable. So they constructed an entire spiritual enterprise to ensure death would not rob them of these joys. The result of those efforts has, ironically, granted them a form of immortality in this world too. While countless other ancient peoples' names and deeds have vanished in time, the Egyptians succeeded in being remembered. We still speak the names of pharaohs like Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, Ramesses, and ordinary ones like Sennacherib the artisan or Ani the scribe, whose Book of the Dead scroll survives. Their tomb inscriptions still communicate their voices to us. It's eerie and beautiful that an ancient Egyptian can say, "I was benevolent and just, do not forget me," and a visitor 3,000 years later hears that. In a way, by fearing oblivion and striving so ardently against it, they lodged themselves in the collective human memory for millennia. Now, as our exploration comes to a close, let's return to that dark tomb where we began, but this time with understanding instead of trepidation. The single flickering flame we imagined in Nacht's burial chamber did more than reveal painted spells on the walls. It symbolized the Egyptians' will to bring light to the darkness. Every prayer murmured by a mourning priest, every golden charm placed on a mummy's chest, every hieroglyph carved into a sarcophagus was an act of lighting a tiny flame against oblivion. They could not banish their fear of the afterlife's perils. It was always there, urging them on. But they could prepare for it so thoroughly that, in the story they wrote for themselves, fear would be overcome by knowledge, purity, and divine grace. In the east, far above the Nile, the sky would glow with sunrise each morning, a daily reassurance that light overcomes darkness. The ancient Egyptians oriented their lives toward an eternal sunrise beyond death. They built tombs and temples aligned with the stars and cardinal points. They spoke of going forth by day as the goal of the soul. They even painted the ceilings of their burial chambers deep blue with golden 5-pointed stars to resemble the night sky turning into day. In their fear of the afterlife's night, they never lost sight of the coming dawn. So why did the ancient Egyptians fear the afterlife? Ultimately because they cared so profoundly about life and order that the possibility of losing those for eternity was unbearable. That fear drove them to immense creative and moral efforts. It led them to embalm their dead with exquisite care, to compose thousands of spells and prayers, to evaluate their own hearts in light of Ma'at daily. Their fear was the shadow cast by a great light, a belief in cosmic justice and the hope of immortality. And so, thousands of years later, we stand in awe of their pyramids and read the delicate papyri of their Book of the Dead, and we feel a connection across time. We too wonder what comes after death. We too carry fears of the unknown. The Egyptians, through their obsessive preparations, assure us that even in the face of death, one can act with purpose, courage, and imagination. They feared the afterlife, but they also mastered it, transforming terror into a voyage of wonder and transcendence. The story of their afterlife, from the pitch-dark tomb and flickering flame, through the gauntlet of demons, into the radiant field of reeds, remains one of humanity's most extraordinary attempts to conquer fear with faith. It is a journey from dread to triumph that will forever captivate and inspire all who hear their story, a testament that the flicker of a small flame of hope can indeed conquer the deepest night. In the hushed stillness of an Egyptian night, a lone figure stands in the desert where giants once rose from sand and stone. The air is warm and the silence is vast. Overhead the sky blooms with stars, and against that infinite dark canvas, a few colossal silhouettes break the horizon. These are the pyramids, ancient, enigmatic, their broad shoulders of limestone catching the faint silver of moonlight. They tower above the dunes like guardians in a realm of emptiness. All around them the desert stretches boundless and bare. Once, more of these giants might have ruled this landscape, monuments to the pharaoh's glory. Now only a handful remain to keep vigil, and in the emptiness between them linger countless questions. Why here, and only here? Why so few when ancient Egypt's civilization spanned millennia? Standing there in the midnight desert, one cannot help but wonder, why doesn't Egypt have more pyramids? Why did the age of these monumental tombs rise so dramatically and then end, leaving later centuries in the shadow of these immense memories? To seek the answers, we must journey back in time to the dawn of the Pyramid Age and beyond. As grains of sand slip through the fingers of history, we follow them to an epoch of pharaohs and sun gods, of engineers and labourers, of prosperity and ruin. We step into the golden light of 5,000 years past to witness how and why these giants were born, and why eventually the desert grew quiet of their footsteps. More than 1,000 years before Cleopatra's time, before the Valley of the Kings or the great temples of Luxor, Egypt's rulers poured their will and wealth into pyramids. We find ourselves now around 2630 BC, in the third dynasty of the Old Kingdom. Egypt is unified and flourishing under a powerful central government. The pharaoh is not just a king, he is considered a living god on earth, the mediator between his people and the divine. The Nile River's yearly floods have been generous, turning the fields into emerald green and filling granaries with grain. With food surplus and the country at peace, the stage is set for an audacious leap in architecture and spiritual ambition. It begins with Pharaoh Djoser. Until Djoser's reign, around the dawn of the Old Kingdom, kings were laid to rest in mastabas, low rectangular tombs of mud brick or stone, impressive in their own way but humble compared to what came next. Djoser dared to dream bigger. He commissioned something the world had never seen, a tomb that would rise toward the sky. His architect, the legendary Imhotep, envisioned stacking one mastaba atop another, each level slightly smaller, creating a giant stone stairway to the heavens. At Saqqara, on the west bank of the Nile, what started as a flat, square tomb grew layer by layer into a towering structure of 6 steps. As each layer was added, onlookers must have gazed in wonder and perhaps a little fear as the structure climbed above the desert plain. When it was finished, the step pyramid of Djoser soared roughly 200 feet high, gleaming white in the sun, a stairway for the king's soul to ascend to the imperishable stars. This was history's first pyramid, a shape that echoed the rays of the sun and the primeval mound of creation from Egyptian myth. It was a revolution in engineering, the first time a monumental structure was built entirely of cut stone. Beneath it lay a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers stocked with offerings, and a sarcophagus for the king, meant to secure Djoser's comfort and power in eternity. The step pyramid announced to the world that Egypt's pharaohs had both the divine mandate and the earthly might to marshal vast resources for a single, breathtaking purpose. It was a statement in limestone of Egypt's newfound confidence and the pharaoh's transcendent status. Djoser's people must have believed that as this pyramid stood firm, so would Ma'at, the divine order of the world. Djoser's pioneering monument lit the spark, and in the generations that followed, that spark became a blazing flame of pyramid building. The fourth dynasty, circa 2600 to 2500 BC, marked the zenith of Egypt's Pyramid Age, a time of almost superhuman feats of construction. Pharaoh Sneferu, who founded that dynasty, was a king with boundless drive. He ordered not one, but at least 3 pyramids during his reign. At Maidum, he began a pyramid that later partially collapsed, a sign that even the gods of engineering demanded trial and error from mortals. Undeterred, Sneferu moved north to Dahshur and built the bent pyramid, so named because its upper half angles inward, a change in design likely made when the builders noticed structural stress. As if learning from a rehearsal, Sneferu then oversaw the construction of the Red Pyramid nearby with perfectly smooth flat sides. This was the first true gleaming pyramid, no steps visible, just a seamless ascent to the sky. When Sneferu died, Egypt had proven it could erect mountains of stone at will. In fact, Sneferu's projects used more stone and covered more volume overall than even his successors' pyramids. He was a one-man pyramid boom. But even Sneferu's achievements were eclipsed by his son Khufu, who took royal ambition to its ultimate extreme. On the Giza Plateau, overlooking the Nile, Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid, a tomb of unprecedented scale, truly fit for a god-king. For roughly 2 decades, an army of workers, engineers, and artisans toiled to raise this colossal monument. It rose to a height of about 481 feet, 147 meters when finished, the tallest structure made by human hands in the world for nearly 4,000 years. Some 2.3 million limestone and granite blocks, weighing on average 2.5 tons each, with some as heavy as 15 tons, were quarried, transported, and set into place with astonishing precision. The pyramid's sides were aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, and its base formed a near-perfect square, each side about 230 meters long, an enormous footprint equal to about 8 or 9 football fields in area. When its outer casing of fine white limestone was intact, the Great Pyramid would have shone brilliantly under the Egyptian sun, visible for dozens of miles, a man-made mountain radiating light. Khufu's Great Pyramid was more than a tomb. It was theology made tangible, a resurrection machine in stone. Deep inside, hidden chambers and passageways were designed to ensure the king's safe passage to the afterlife. The very shape of the pyramid, broad at the base and tapering to a point, symbolized the sun's rays descending to earth, or the Benben, the primordial hill that first emerged from the waters of chaos in Egyptian creation myths. By climbing those rays or that hill symbolically, the deceased pharaoh's soul would ascend to join the gods among the stars. In essence, Khufu's monument was a guarantee of his eternal life and a bold claim to divine status. The pyramid's capstone, the pyramidion, possibly gilded, would have caught the first light of dawn and the last light of dusk, linking the king forever with Ra, the sun god. This was immortality by design. Khufu's successors, Khafra and Menkaura, built their own pyramids at Giza, each slightly smaller than its predecessor but still awe-inspiring by any later standard. Khafra's pyramid, which today stands 136 meters tall, sits on higher ground and retains a limestone cap at its apex, so it often appears taller than Khufu's. At its foot, Khafra likely commissioned the Great Sphinx, the colossal guardian statue with a lion's body and the face of a king, carved directly out of the bedrock. Menkaur's pyramid was the smallest of the 3 giants, originally about 65 meters high, but it had an elegant touch. The bottom courses of its casing were sheathed in rosy red granite from Aswan, a costly and difficult stone to quarry and transport. During this golden age of the Old Kingdom, Egypt's centralized government could muster resources on a scale that boggles the modern mind. The state mobilized tens of thousands of workers, some seasonally, farmers conscripted during the Nile's flood when fields lay under water and idle, and others full-time, skilled masons, sledges men, carpenters, and priests. Royal storehouses opened to provide abundant rations, grain to bake bread, cattle and fish for protein, and beer, the staple drink, by the gallon to fuel the labourers' energies. Bureaucrats organised deliveries of limestone blocks from the Tura quarries across the river, and granite from hundreds of miles to the south in Aswan. These heavy materials were ferried on the Nile when the floodwaters were high, then hauled overland along carefully prepared causeways and ramps. Engineering innovations flourished. Massive straight or spiral ramps of mud brick and rubble were built to drag stones higher and higher as the pyramid rose. Levers and rollers were likely used to fine-tune the placement of multi-ton blocks. Water-filled trenches served as levelers to ensure each base stone was set perfectly horizontal. Mathematics and astronomy guided the layout. priests astronomers observed the circumpolar stars to align the pyramid's sides to true north within a tiny fraction of a degree. Logistics, architecture, religion, and sheer human determination all merged in the act of pyramid construction. We can almost hear the clamour on the Giza plateau during those years. The scrape of copper chisels on hard stone blocks, the grunt and chant of teams hauling sledges up a ramp in unison, perhaps shouting, "Yo heave ho!" in ancient Egyptian, the shouted commands of overseers keeping the timing and spacing, the occasional crack of a whip, or the rumble of a massive block settling into its slot with a thud. Dust swirls in the hot sunlight, the scent of sweat and pulverized rock hangs in the air. The king himself might watch from a shaded pavilion as his monument ascends toward the sky week by week. This is a national project, immense at all times and even festive at times. Archaeologists have found evidence of grand feasts at the workers' village, heaps of animal bones, bread mould remains, beer jars by the thousands. One can imagine on certain feast days, perhaps when a milestone was reached, like completing a pyramid level, the workforce was treated to roast cattle, fresh bread and extra beer rations, fueling a night of celebration under the stars. The labourers toil not just for sustenance, but out of a deeply ingrained reverence for their divine ruler and the cosmic importance of their task. To build the pharaoh's eternal house is to ensure the god's favour on the entire land. At sunset, when the day's hauling ceases and a cool dusk breeze blows off the river, the workers might gaze up at the growing pyramid with pride. By the glow of campfires they could sing songs of the pharaoh's glory, or recount myths of creation, knowing that in raising this edifice they are participating in the eternal story of their people. In truth, to build a pyramid was to be part of something far greater than oneself. Looking at the Giza pyramids as the Fourth Dynasty drew to a close, one sees more than immense tombs. One sees the apex of what the Old Kingdom could achieve when unified under a powerful vision. Each of these pyramids was a marvel of statecraft as much as stonecraft, consuming a significant portion of the kingdom's wealth and manpower, but also undoubtedly inspiring reverence and unity. The pyramids proclaimed that Egypt's kings had reached into the realm of gods and eternity and built monuments that would outlast countless generations. It must have seemed in those days around 2500 BC that this triumphant trend could go on forever, that each new pharaoh would continue to raise his own pyramid, perhaps even larger or more splendid than the last, in an unbroken chain of glory. But history would take a different turn. Indeed, the unparalleled achievements of the Fourth Dynasty would never be repeated. In the Fifth and Sixth Dynasties, circa 2500 to 2200 BC, pharaohs continued to build pyramids, but something had subtly changed. The giants of Giza were not to be reborn. Instead, later pyramids were generally smaller and often less sturdily built, as if the kingdom's breath had grown a bit shorter. We find ourselves at Abusir, a royal necropolis of the Fifth Dynasty just south of Giza. Here, pharaohs like Sahura, Neferikare, and Niuserre erected their pyramids. In their time, these pyramids were respectable monuments, accompanied by lovely temples decorated with carved reliefs of the king's victories and estates. But today, most of them appear as little more than flattened mounds of rubble. Why? A look at their construction tells the tale. Unlike the Great Pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty, which were built with strong limestone core blocks or granite, many Fifth Dynasty pyramids were built with a core of crumbly rubble or low-quality local limestone, supplemented by mud bricks. They were then encased in a shell of finer limestone to give them smooth faces. This method was quicker and required moving fewer large stones, but it was structurally weaker. When later ages scavenged those outer casing blocks to build new temples, churches, or mosques, the heart of those pyramids bled out in landslides of dust and stone. What we see now are the skeletal remains, denuded of their skins. This decline in size and quality likely mirrors a gradual shift in the kingdom's capabilities and priorities. It suggests that the pharaoh's centralized power, while still significant, was not quite as absolute as it had been a century or two earlier. The royal treasury might not have been able, or willing, to allocate the same colossal resources to a single project. The economy was diversifying, high officials and local governors were gaining more influence and siphoning off some of the wealth and labour for their own family tombs or regional projects. Evidence from tomb inscriptions of the 5th dynasty indicates that provincial nobles were more prominent than before, building elaborate tombs and celebrating their own achievements, which hints that the pharaoh had to share a bit more of the spotlight and resources. There was also a religious shift underway. The cult of Ra, the sun god, had risen to unprecedented prominence in the 5th dynasty. Earlier pharaohs identified primarily with Horus, the sky falcon, or with the concept of a divine king in general. 5th dynasty kings explicitly called themselves Son of Ra in their official titulary. They demonstrated devotion to Ra by building sun temples, specialized open-air temples west of Memphis, where they erected huge obelisks and altars to honor the sun. 2 of these sun temples, at Abu Ghurab, have been excavated, and they suggest that enormous resources, workforce, materials, were poured into the worship of Ra. It's possible that because the pharaohs were investing in these grand public religious monuments, they were content to have somewhat more modest pyramids for their personal tombs. Their legacy was to be shared with the sun, God himself. A ruler like Nefertari might have thought, "My pyramid need not be as massive as Khufu's if I am also building a magnificent temple to Ra that will ensure the god's favour on Egypt." Inside the pyramids of the late 5th and 6th dynasties, other changes appeared that speak to evolving priorities. The last king of the 5th dynasty, Unas, did something revolutionary within his pyramid at Saqqara. He had the interior walls of his burial chamber and antechamber inscribed with hundreds of hieroglyphic spells, the pyramid texts. These texts are liturgies and incantations meant to protect the king's remains and assist his soul in reaching the celestial realms. Up until Unas, the walls of pyramids had been bare, as far as we know. The architecture itself was the magic. But Unas, whose pyramid was the smallest of those at Saqqara, barely 43 meters tall originally, perhaps felt the need to reinforce his journey to eternity with words, in addition to stones. The practice caught on. The kings of the 6th dynasty, like Teti, Pepi I, Merenre, and Pepi II, all filled their inner chambers with these beautiful cryptic texts. One could say that as the pyramids shrank in physical grandeur, the Egyptians compensated by making them repositories of sacred knowledge. The focus was shifting from the external monument to the internal, eternal message. It was a brilliant adaptation. A smaller pyramid could still guarantee eternal life if fortified with the proper spells from the god's own book. Yet, even as they found new ways to uphold their royal ideology, the pharaohs of the late Old Kingdom were grappling with mounting challenges. The 6th dynasty, especially under the very long reign of Pepi II, saw signs of weakening central control. Pepi II is said to have ruled more than 90 years, coming to the throne as a young boy and dying as a frail old man. While that sounds impressive, an excessively long reign can breed succession problems. Pepi outlived many of his heirs, and stagnation. Over decades, local governors, nomarchs, grew used to running affairs their own way in distant provinces. They built power bases and in some cases small armies of retainers. They still nominally honoured the pharaoh, but the urgency of his absolute authority was fading. In tomb biographies from that time, these officials boast of their own achievements and wealth in ways that would have been unthinkable back in Khufu's day. The delicate balance that sustained the pyramid-building fervour was beginning to tip. There are clues that climate change played a role as well. Records from both ancient writings and modern scientific data indicate that towards the end of the Old Kingdom, Egypt experienced a period of erratic, low Nile floods, part of a larger drought event around 2200 BC. Less water meant poor harvests, perhaps for several years running. The economic strain on a society that depended so directly on the Nile's bounty must have been enormous. Grain shortages can quickly lead to political unrest. A text from a later period, the famous Admonitions of Ipuwer, which might be a reflection or memory of this chaotic time, paints a grim picture. Everywhere barley has perished, and men are stripped of clothes, spice, and oil. The storehouse is empty, and its keeper is stretched on the ground. The rich man is in distress, and the poor man is full of joy. It describes a world turned upside down, famine, social upheaval, perhaps even violence and invasion. It speaks of foreigners entering the delta. Although Ipuwer's text is literary and exaggerative in nature and written centuries later, the kernel of truth is that the Old Kingdom's end was accompanied by hardship and fragmentation. By around 2150 BC, after Pepi II's passing, the centralised monarchy in Egypt essentially broke down. What followed is known as the First Intermediate Period, a time of decentralisation, rival local dynasties, and a loss of the old order. For a long moment, the flame that had lit the pyramid builders' hearts flickered out. No longer could a single king command the united effort required to raise a stone mountain. Surviving inscriptions and the stark absence of monumental building projects in this era suggest that the royal government, now split among competing claimants and regional lords, lacked both the resources and the authority to embark on anything like a pyramid. Instead, these ephemeral kings, some ruling from the northern city of Heracleopolis, others from Thebes in the south, had to focus on asserting control, fighting each other, or simply surviving year to year. Picture a night during this troubled time of Egypt's collapse. The moon is but a sliver, and darkness shrouds the land. A small group of men moves like shadows across the sands toward a looming shape on the horizon, a great pyramid now centuries old, its white casing stones glowing faintly in the starlight. These men are tomb robbers, driven by desperation and greed. Perhaps a drought has left their families starving. Perhaps lawlessness has given them boldness. They know that within this pyramid, say the pyramid of Pepi I or Unas at Saqqara, lies a trove of precious items: gold, jewellery, fine linen, alabaster vessels filled with perfumes and oils, the burial goods intended to serve a king in his afterlife. Such treasures could feed their children or make them rich in a time when ordinary life has broken down. By torchlight, the robbers find a weak point, a gap where time and decay have opened a seam in the pyramid's casing. Heart-pounding, one man wedges himself through into a narrow passage thick with stale air. The beam of his flickering torch dances over painted hieroglyphs on the walls, the very pyramid texts that promise dire curses on the impious who disrupt the pharaoh's rest. He hesitates, swallowing hard. In the silence, perhaps he can hear his own breath and the scuttle of insects disturbed by the light. But hunger and the hope of wealth harden his resolve. He presses onward, squeezing down passageways that no living person has traversed since the tomb was sealed. His companions follow, dragging tools, crude chisels, wooden levers. Deep in the pyramid's core, they come upon a heavy stone blocking the corridor, a portcullis dropped in place to thwart exactly this kind of intrusion. It takes hours of grueling effort, but eventually they pry open a small gap under it and slither through like snakes. At last they reach the burial chamber. The torchlight falls upon a grand sarcophagus and glitters off faint reflections of gold on a shrine and offerings laid out for the king. The robber's eyes widen. In that moment, these desperate men behold what was never meant for their eyes, the sacred sanctuary of a god-king. Perhaps one of them mutters a quick apology to the gods, insurance against the curse, before they set to work gathering loot. They stuff small golden amulets into sackcloth bags, yank precious amethyst and turquoise beads off a royal collar, tip over a heavy alabaster jar and find it still contains thick, scented oil. They even chip away at the sarcophagus lid, looking for more. In their rough haste, they scatter dried offerings and disturb the pharaoh's mummy itself, pushing aside the lid and exposing the royal corpse to grab jewellery or the golden death mask. The riches they carry off into the night might feed their families for a year, or buy them land in a lawless time. We do not know their fate. But we do know the fate of the pharaoh's tomb. In that torchlit hour, the carefully laid plans for eternity unravel. The king's body, which was to remain inviolate for millions of years, has been desecrated. His treasures, meant to serve him in the afterlife, have been profaned and scattered. The robbers disappear into the darkness before dawn, leaving the pyramid silent once more, but forever empty. Scenes like this, multiplied across the country and across the years of chaos, spelled the end of the illusion that any tomb, no matter how massive, no matter how ingeniously sealed, could be completely safe from human desperation. Thus, Egypt learned a harsh lesson written not in ink, but in blood and broken stone. No pyramid was impervious to time and turmoil. The very forces that had built these wonders, human labour, faith, ambition, had their dark mirror in human greed, fear, and need. By the end of the first intermediate period, the notion of pharaohs building gargantuan pyramids as a matter of course had faded. It was not that the idea of the pyramid lost its allure. It was simply that the nation could no longer afford or organise such projects, and perhaps had grown wary of their ultimate futility. When at last Egypt was reunified, it came with a cautious revival, a sense of renewal tempered by experience. The reunification happened around 2050 BC. The Theban prince Mentuhotep II defeated his northern rivals and brought the two lands under one rule again, inaugurating what we call the Middle Kingdom. With strong leadership, Egypt entered a new era of stability, prosperity, and artistic flourishing comparable to the Old Kingdom's heights. And indeed, with this rebirth, pharaohs did return to the practice of building pyramids. How could they not? The pyramid was the ultimate symbol of kingship and divine connection, a powerful nod to the glorious past that any new ruler would want to invoke. But the pyramids of the Middle Kingdom could not simply copy the colossi of earlier times. The world had changed, and so had the approach to these monuments. The first king of the new Dynasty 12, Amenemhat I, moved the royal capital north, closer to Memphis, and chose a site at Lisht, on the desert's edge near the Fayum, to build his pyramid. This was a deliberate return to tradition. Lisht is not far from Saqqara and Maidum, tying the new dynasty to the old. From the outside, Amenemhat's pyramid, when completed, looked much like those of old. It was pyramidal in shape, covered in smooth limestone, with a causeway leading to a beautiful mortuary temple and satellite pyramids for his consorts. But if we peeked beneath that shining exterior, we would see a telling difference. Instead of being composed throughout of large, tightly fitted stone blocks, the core of the pyramid was largely made of mud bricks and rough stones set in a loose fill. Fine limestone was used only where necessary, for the outer casing, for the floors and walls of chambers, and for the temple. In essence, the Egyptians had developed a cost-saving architecture. A solid stone pyramid like Khufu's required an almost unimaginable amount of quarrying and hauling. A mud brick core could be produced with far fewer resources. Mud from the Nile was plentiful and easily formed into bricks. The trade-off was durability. Mud brick erodes quickly when exposed, but presumably they expected the casing to protect it, and perhaps they were more concerned with the pyramid's appearance and function over the short term, centuries, than absolute permanence for millennia. Pharaoh Senusret I, Amenemhat's successor, followed suit with his own pyramid at Lisht. As each king came to the throne, a pyramid complex was begun. Senusret II at El Lahun by the entrance to the Fayum, Senusret III at Dahshur, returning to the site of Sneferu's pyramids, maybe consciously to associate with that golden age, and Amenemhat III, one of the greatest kings of that dynasty, who ambitiously built two pyramids, one at Dahshur, the so-called Black Pyramid, which unfortunately suffered serious structural problems, and another at Hawara near the Fayum, which became his final resting place. Each of these pyramids was more modest in scale than those at Giza. For example, Amenemhat III's Hawara pyramid was about 58 meters tall, roughly one-third the height of the Great Pyramid. But the Middle Kingdom pharaohs invested in other ways. The complexes had extensive temples and incredibly intricate substructures designed to protect the burial and confuse robbers. Indeed, Middle Kingdom architects became master tricksters to defend against the kind of plundering that had plagued the first intermediate period. They created false passages and blank slabs that looked like doors but led nowhere. They dug burial chambers deep and then plugged the entry tunnels with massive granite blocks after interment, using gravity and clever engineering to seal them away. Amenemhat III's Hawara pyramid was accompanied by what Herodotus later described as a labyrinth, a sprawling complex of 12 courts and a maze of rooms that could have functioned as an administrative and ceremonial centre, but also as a formidable obstacle to any unauthorized intruder. Senusret III's pyramid at Dahshur had its burial chamber hidden not beneath the centre of the pyramid, as was typical, but offset far to one side, reached through a secret passage outside the pyramid's footprint. A dramatic break in pattern meant to outfox would-be tomb raiders. The Middle Kingdom was in many ways a more frugal, practical time than the Pyramid Age of old. The kings of the 12th dynasty were warrior administrators as much as god kings. They expanded Egypt's borders south into Nubia, built forts, dug canals, and managed a standing army. They had learned, collectively, that the pharaoh's role was not just to bask in divine grandeur, but to actively ensure the welfare and security of the nation. In such a paradigm, it perhaps made sense to moderate the scale of pyramid building. A massive pyramid like Khufu's might have seemed an overspending of effort when Egypt also needed fortresses manned and irrigation works maintained. The Fayum oasis was developed in this period with extensive irrigation projects, likely under Amenemhat III, a sign that royal energies were also devoted to increasing agricultural output for the people. Thus, the pyramids of the Middle Kingdom reflect a balancing act, honouring tradition and projecting royal authority, but not at the expense of bankrupting the treasury or neglecting other duties. They were grand but not grandiose. However, for all their planning and prudence, the Middle Kingdom pharaohs could not guarantee that their eternal houses would remain inviolate any more than the old kings could. In time, all their pyramids too were robbed. If one visits the site of Amenemhat II's pyramid at Dasha or Senusret II's at Lahun today, one sees only stubby remnants. The erosion of mud core and the quarrying of casing stones reduced them to ghostly hills. The mummies of these kings are gone. Their sarcophagi were found later, empty. Some Middle Kingdom pyramids collapsed from internal structural failures even in antiquity. The Black Pyramid of Amenemhat III began to crack and was abandoned during construction. It's sobering to realize that, despite improved tactics, the Egyptians could not ultimately solve the riddle of preserving a tomb forever. The Middle Kingdom ended in the same way as the Old, with decline, division, and foreign invasion, and its monuments too fell prey to time and human hands. By around 1800 BC, the 12th dynasty gave way to a less stable 13th dynasty. Kings came and went rapidly. Some may have started small pyramids that they didn't rule long enough to finish, or that are lost to us. We have the ruins of a couple of likely late Middle Kingdom pyramids at Mazguna, south of Dasha, that were probably begun for rulers like Amenemhat IV or Queen Sobek-Neferu, but they were never completed or were left as bare foundations. Soon, Egypt entered the Second Intermediate Period, a time of fragmenting power. In the north, a foreign Semitic people we call the Hyksos seized control of the delta and ruled as pharaohs in their own right, albeit not recognized by the native Egyptian south. These Hyksos kings, ruling from avarice, showed respect to Egyptian culture. They took Egyptian names, worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own, and likely were buried according to Egyptian customs. Yet, interestingly, they did not, as far as evidence shows, build themselves pyramids. Perhaps the idea was by then considered old-fashioned or too demanding, or more practically, the Nile Delta's geography, wet and lacking the rocky desert plateaus of the south, simply wasn't suitable for pyramid building. The Hyksos seemed content with simpler tombs. Meanwhile, to the south, native Egyptian princes in Thebes kept the embers of Egyptian pride alive, and their burials in this period were also in tombs cut into the mountains, like at Dra Abu el Naga, or small pyramid-like chapels, but nothing on the monumental scale. Thus, for a second time, pyramid construction in Egypt ground to a halt. Decentralization and the presence of foreign rulers pushed grand royal tomb building low on the priority list. But, as before, Egypt's spirit was not permanently dimmed. By 1550 BC, the Theban king Ahmose rallied the southern Egyptians, expelled the Hyksos, and reunified the country once more, inaugurating the New Kingdom, Egypt's third great era of unity and power. One might expect, with Egypt now free, wealthy from plunder and tribute, and more powerful than ever, that the pyramid would make a grand comeback. And indeed, I did build a pyramid, interestingly enough. He constructed a small pyramid, now ruined, at Abydos, perhaps as a cenotaph or symbolic tomb linked to the cult of his revered grandmother, Queen Tetisheri. In doing so, he was consciously reaching back over 5 centuries to the age of the last great pyramid builders, as if to say, the glory of the old kingdom is reborn in the new. But, tellingly, our Moses pyramid was the last of its kind in Egypt. His successors chose a completely different approach to burial that, in many ways, was the antithesis of the pyramid. Rather than building up to the sky, they would burrow into the earth. Rather than monumental visibility, they would seek obscurity and secrecy. The age of the pyramids had given way to the age of the hidden tombs. The New Kingdom pharaohs, from the mighty Thutmose and Hatshepsut to the Ramesside kings like Ramses II, were no less ambitious or divine in their pretensions than their predecessors. They had access to perhaps even greater wealth, as Egypt became a cosmopolitan empire controlling Nubia and rich trade routes. So why did they stop building pyramids? The simplest answer: security. By the start of the New Kingdom, everyone knew that the pyramids of previous eras, for all their imposing grandeur, had failed to protect the bodies and treasures within. The phrase "pyramids were inevitably plundered" could have been on the lips of every court advisor. The new rulers determined not to offer such an obvious target to thieves. So they moved their tombs to the most remote, secretive place they could find, a barren valley in the desert mountains of Thebes, on the Nile's west bank. This place is today called the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings is a narrow, winding defile surrounded by steep limestone cliffs. In ancient times, it was accessible only by a rough path. Crucially, the valley has a natural geography that lent itself to hidden burials. The entrances to the tombs could be easily concealed amid rocks, and the entire area could be guarded at a few choke points. Moreover, and perhaps this is poetic fate, the highest peak above the valley is a pyramidal mountain, today named Al-Qurn. It has a pointed, pyramid-like shape that dominates the horizon. In the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, this may have been seen as a natural pyramid provided by the gods. By placing their tombs in the Valley of the Kings beneath this peak, the pharaohs might have felt they were symbolically burying themselves under a pyramid without having to actually build one. In essence, nature built their pyramid for them in Thebes. The shift to the Valley of the Kings happened within a generation or two after Ahmose. Pharaoh Amenhotep I, son of Ahmose, is traditionally credited with being one of the first to be buried in a rock-cut tomb separate from his temple, though his tomb hasn't been definitively identified. The practice was certainly established by Thutmose I, around 1500 BC, whose tomb was cut deep into the valley cliffs. A remarkable inscription by the man who supervised the work, Ineni, still survives. Ineni wrote of Thutmose's tomb, "I supervised the excavation of the cliff tomb of His Majesty, alone, no one seeing, no one hearing." This single line reveals the utmost importance of secrecy. Unlike a pyramid, which was public from the moment it rose from the ground, a valley tomb's very creation was meant to be hush, hush. Workers likely swore oaths of silence. The area of the tomb entrance was perhaps fenced off or declared off-limits under pain of death. When the tomb was completed and the king's mummy interred with fabulous riches, the entrance was sealed and then deliberately buried under debris and rubble to hide it. The location might have been known only to a trusted few priests and officials, who would then continue to perform rituals for the king's spirit in an anonymous chapel far from the actual grave. Imagine the Valley of the Kings during the height of the New Kingdom. The walls of the canyons glow orange in the late afternoon sun. At a guarded entrance to the valley, royal soldiers stand watch, scrutinizing anyone who comes or goes. Deep in a wadi, hidden from distant view, a team of labourers and artisans works by the light of oil lamps. They are cutting a corridor into the heart of the mountain for Pharaoh Hatshepsut's eternal house, or perhaps Amenhotep II's. The hammering of chisels on rock echoes in the confined space. The workers have been carefully selected. They are the crews from Deir el Medina, a state village of tomb artisans sworn to secrecy and well compensated for their pains. Each man knows that the slightest whisper of the tomb's location to an outsider could invite punishment on him and his family. Up on the cliffs, lookouts scan for any unauthorized approach. By day, the valley is a place of intense, if quiet, labor. By night, if one were to peek into the darkness, one might see a procession of priests clambering to a secret entrance, conducting a consecration ritual under stars, then covering the doorway with slabs and sand, wiping away their footprints as they leave. Once a tomb in the valley was completed and sealed, all that visibly remained might be a few cut stone chips or a fading worker's path, signs that the desert winds would soon erase. The king's funerary cult was not practiced at the tomb, as it had been at the foot of each pyramid in the Old Kingdom. Instead, the pharaoh's memorial temple, often called a mansion of millions of years, was built miles away on the edge of the Green Nile floodplain. Take Hatshepsut's splendid mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its terraces and colonnades elegantly blending into the cliffs, or Rameses II's grand Ramesseum with its pylons and fallen colossal statue. These were places where people could come and pay homage to the deceased king's divine spirit, where priests made daily offerings and recited prayers. They were designed to be impressive, visible, and accessible, filled with statues and reliefs proclaiming the pharaoh's greatness and piety. The tomb, on the other hand, was designed to be invisible, a sanctum no living person should disturb. This separation of the public mortuary temple and the private burial tomb is one of the defining features of New Kingdom royal practices, and it stands in stark contrast to the Old Kingdom, where the pyramid and the mortuary temple were directly linked, components of one complex. Religious ideology too had taken a turn that favoured hidden tombs. The New Kingdom was an era of theological flowering. Funerary texts became far more elaborate than the austere pyramid texts of old. The underworld was conceived as a complicated realm through which the pharaoh's soul must travel at night, accompanying the sun god through 12 caverns or hours, battling monsters and bringing about the rebirth of the dawn. Texts like the Amduat, that which is in the underworld, and the Book of Gates were composed to detail this journey. The walls of New Kingdom tombs were the canvas for these cosmic journeys, richly painted scenes of the pharaoh in his solar bark, of serpents and lakes of fire, of protective deities and gates that needed secret passwords. A pyramid, with its relatively cramped interior, simply did not offer the room for such narrative artwork. But a tomb cut into a mountainside could be as long and winding as the king desired, with corridors, chambers, and niches, all available for decoration. The tombs of pharaohs like Seti, Fenrir, or Rameses III are virtual subterranean palaces with colourful murals covering every inch, depicting the pharaoh's transition through the afterlife in sumptuous detail. In a way, these decorated tombs achieved by art what pyramids achieved by sheer mass. They prepared the king's soul for eternity, but via liturgy and symbolism rather than architectural might. The New Kingdom pharaohs also found new ways to display their might to the world of the living that did not involve tombs. They erected towering obelisks in temple precincts, like those of Thutmose III and Hatshepsut at Karnak, needle-like pyramids in miniature, whose golden tips caught the sun in honour of Ra. They commissioned gigantic statues of themselves, the pair of colossi of Memnon, 18-metre-tall stone figures of Amenhotep III, that still sit placidly at the West Bank's edge, or the 4 colossal seated figures fronting the rock-cut temple of Abu Simbel that Ramesses II built in Nubia. These were feats of engineering and artistry equal to moving pyramid blocks, but with a different purpose. They glorified the king's image in places where it could be seen and admired by both Egyptians and foreigners in awe. The statement had shifted from, "I build this so I may live forever," the pyramid's message, to "See how the God-King dominates the present world," the temple and statues' message. Under the influence of Thebes' local god Amun, who rose to become the supreme state deity, merged with Ra as Amun-Ra, the emphasis on grand religious architecture peaked. The Temple of Karnak in Thebes grew into a forest of columns and gateways as each king added to it. The wealth and workforce that one might have spent on a pyramid were now lavished on Karnak's hyperstyle hall or on Luxor Temple's courts and statues. These were sanctuaries for the gods and for the king's legacy among his people, not tombs for his body. It's as if the Egyptian kings found a more community-focused outlet for their megalomania. By building for the gods, and incidentally advertising themselves, they perhaps could justify the expenditure more than building a gigantic vault solely for their own corpse. So, through a combination of practical necessity and evolving values, the pyramid was retired as a royal tomb. The New Kingdom elites, interestingly, sometimes incorporated pyramid shapes in their private tomb chapels. Small brick pyramids atop the funerary chapel structure were popular among Theban nobility as markers. But for the kings, the die was cast. Their eternal homes would be hidden in the earth. And for a few hundred years, this system worked fairly well. The Valley of the Kings did see some robberies even during the New Kingdom. In the reign of Ramesses IX, around 1100 BC, records show trials of tomb robbers who had broken into the royal tombs, indicating that the secret had leaked and the lure of gold was unstoppable. By the end of the New Kingdom, virtually all the royal tombs had been breached. In a desperate act of piety and pragmatism, priests of the 21st dynasty gathered many of the mummies of great pharaohs, including Seti the Fern, Ramesses II, and others whose resting places had been desecrated, and hid them in two secret caches, one in a shaft in the cliffs at Deir el-Bahri, and another in Amenhotep II's own tomb, effectively creating safe bunkers for the royal dead. These hidden caches remained undisturbed until their dramatic discovery in the late 19th century AD, when modern archaeologists found them. The careful reburial of those kings by the priests suggests that by around 1000 BC, Egyptians acknowledged that even their new system had failed to guarantee eternal security. They lacked the resources or stable authority to do more than gather up the pieces and hope for the best. After the New Kingdom, Egypt never regained the consistent might and stability needed to undertake pyramid construction again. The first millennium BC saw Egypt often divided or under foreign domination. Libyan chiefs, Nubian kings, Persian conquerors, and finally Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic Ptolemies, followed by Roman rule. These later rulers integrated into Egyptian society to varying degrees, but none of them resumed the building of pyramids in Egypt. The Saite kings of the late period, 26th dynasty, 7th century BC, revived archaic artistic styles and may have even mummified animals in huge numbers as part of a throwback to old religion. But their own tombs were subterranean chambers in the delta or modest pyramidal tombs of much smaller scale. The Ptolemaic Greek dynasty built magnificent new temples like Edfu and Dendera to honour Egyptian gods, and even designed their own tombs with some Egyptian elements, but they did not adopt pyramid building. The age of pyramids in the land where it was born had closed permanently. However, the idea of the pyramid did not die. In a twist of fate, it found new life to the south of Egypt. The Kushite kings of Nubia, who had once been vassals and then briefly overlords of Egypt, the 25th dynasty, circa 750 to 656 BC, had a great admiration for Egyptian culture. Long after they were expelled from Egypt by the Assyrians, the Nubian kingdom, now centered deeper south at Meroe, continued to flourish. Starting around 300 BC and onward into the early centuries AD, the kings and queens of Meroe built themselves pyramids. these structures were not clones of the Egyptian giants. They were typically much smaller, perhaps 20 to 30 meters tall, and steeper, often built on a plinth with a small attached offering chapel. Constructed of stone blocks, many of them have survived in the deserts of Sudan as sharp, narrow peaks. Over 200 Nubian pyramids are known, dotting sites like Nuri, El Kuru, and Meroe. They testify to how enduring the pyramid idea was. Even centuries after Egypt had moved on, her neighbours took up the torch and made it their own. To the Nubians, pyramids were an assertion that they too were heirs of the pharaohs, worthy of eternal commemoration. Ironically, in sheer number, Sudan today has more standing pyramids than Egypt, a fact that often surprises people, although they are far smaller and later. The Nubian pyramids continued to be built until around the 4th century AD, when the last native African kingdom to use them converted to other burial styles under different cultural influences. Back in Egypt, some echoes of the pyramid shape persisted in more humble contexts. For example, during the New Kingdom, the common workmen's tombs in the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the craftsmen who built the royal tombs, often had a tiny pyramidion or pyramid-shaped superstructure topping a small chapel in front of the actual tomb chamber. It might be only a few feet high, made of brick or stone, a symbolic nod to the notion of resurrection and the sun's rays. In the late period, circa 7th to 4th centuries BC, some private tombs at Saqqara and Thebes included small pyramids as part of their design as well. And even as late as the Greco-Roman period, we have evidence that Egyptians still revered the pyramid form. Small pyramid-shaped vases or models turn up in tombs, and Roman period paintings show Nile landscapes with pyramid-like structures, indicating they remained icons of the landscape. One might wonder, did any later foreign ruler or wealthy individual ever attempt to literally replicate a pharaonic pyramid in Egypt? There's no clear evidence of a full-size attempt, likely because the knowledge, infrastructure, and will had all faded. Building a pyramid was a national enterprise. By the first millennium BC, Egypt was frequently under rulers who had their own cultural burial preferences. For instance, the Persians built rock-cut tombs in Iran, not pyramids. The Greeks built mausoleums or used catacombs. However, interestingly, the allure of the pyramid did reach as far as Rome. In the 1st century BC, a Roman nobleman named Caius Cestius, enamoured of all things Egyptian, built himself a pyramid tomb in Rome. The pyramid of Cestius, about 37 metres high, still stands near the Porta San Paolo, a solitary pyramid in Europe, inspired directly by those of Egypt that had so captured the Roman imagination after the conquest of Egypt. Throughout the Middle Ages, the pyramids of Giza and a few others visible like those at Saqqara continued to fuel imagination and myth. Travellers from Arabia and Europe wrote fanciful tales about them, that they were granaries of Joseph from the Bible, or treasure houses of ancient kings, or repositories of magical knowledge. They stood in silent grandeur as the world changed around them. At one point, as mentioned earlier, the Ayyubid Sultan al-Aziz in the 12th century tried to dismantle them for stone, but even with medieval manpower, he managed to put only a gash in Menkaur's pyramid before abandoning the effort as hopeless. The pyramids were simply too well built, too massive to be easily pulled apart, a testament to their makers. Thus they earned a sort of inviolability, not through magic but through sheer engineering might, outlasting the intentions even of those who would erase them. In modern times, the pyramids have become almost synonymous with Egypt itself, enduring symbols of the country's ancient heritage and a magnet for wonder and speculation. But crucially, part of what makes them so intriguing is that there are only a few of them relative to what one might expect for a civilization that lasted 3,000 years. This rarity gives each pyramid an outsized significance. It's often said that Egypt has over 100 pyramids, which is true if you count every small one, but the number of large royal pyramids that dominate the landscape is a few dozen at most, and truly only the handful from the Old and Middle Kingdoms remain recognizable monuments. As centuries rolled on, the Egyptians themselves began to see the pyramids as relics of a golden age. By the time of the New Kingdom, a papyrus poem extolled, "Is there anything like former times?" pointing to the pyramids and temples of the past as wonders never to be attained again. Kings like Khaem-Weset, son of Rameses II, took it upon themselves to restore, or at least graffiti their names onto Old Kingdom pyramids, preserving them as links to a revered past. The lack of new pyramids made the existing ones even more special, objects of pilgrimage and nostalgia. Even today, the story of the pyramids isn't completely closed, not in the sense of building them anew, but in discovering those that have been forgotten. Modern archaeological techniques are revealing that Egypt might indeed have more pyramids. Only they are not new constructions, but old ones hidden beneath the sands. Over the past 2 centuries, archaeologists have identified at least about 118 pyramid structures in Egypt. Many of these are small, heavily ruined, or buried. Early explorers like Lepsius in the 19th century compiled lists of pyramids, but the desert can deceive. Some things visible in 1850 vanished under sand dunes by 1950, and others that were hidden have since been exposed by winds or found through investigation. In 2008, archaeologists digging in Saqqara rediscovered the Headless Pyramid, which turned out to belong to a long obscure king named Menkaure from the 5th dynasty, a pyramid noted by Lepsius lost to sand and found again. In recent years, advances in satellite imagery and infrared sensing have allowed researchers like Dr. Sarah Parkak to scan vast tracts of Egypt for telltale geometric shapes beneath the surface. In 2011, one such survey excited the world with news of potentially 17 undiscovered pyramids, as well as thousands of tombs and settlements detected as subsurface anomalies. While not all these leads have panned out, some pyramid signatures turned out to be natural features or mud brick enclosures, the promise remains that more small pyramids or pyramidal foundations could lie awaiting discovery. In our own time, the search for hidden pyramids continues in a very different fashion from Howard Carter's day of pure spadework. Picture a team of scientists peering at a computer screen in a lab. On the screen is a high-contrast satellite image of the Egyptian desert, processed in infrared to reveal subtle differences in density underground. Amid the washes of grey and black representing sand and rock, a lighter rectangle or symmetrical mound catches their eye, something human-made perhaps, beneath a layer of soil. Excitement buzzes in the room. An expedition is planned. Out in the field under the same blazing sun that beat down on Khufu's work gangs, archaeologists unload ground-penetrating radar equipment. They methodically walk the device over the suspect area in a grid pattern. The radar pulses into the ground and reflects back. On a monitor, a ghostly outline appears. Straight lines, maybe even the angles of a square structure buried a few meters below. The team breaks into a smile. It seems a buried monument is indeed there. Carefully they begin to dig, brushing aside sand that has been undisturbed for ages. In a few days they uncover the corner of a wall made of limestone blocks. As more sand is cleared, a small platform comes to light. Could it be the base of a pyramid? Weeks of excavation reveal a pyramidion stone, the capstone fallen and buried, and an inclined side of what was once a pyramid about 20 meters at the base. The hieroglyphs on a fragment of block give a clue to the owner, perhaps a minor king of a chaotic era, or the tomb of a queen whose name was never recorded in surviving lists. A new pyramid has entered the catalogue of Egypt's royal tombs, not new in age, but new in our knowledge. Each such find, rare as they are, sparks headlines and imagination around the world. It reminds us that the sands still hold secrets, that even after 2 centuries of scholarly exploration, we haven't completely exhausted the legacy of the pyramid builders. The use of satellites and radar is like a conversation across time between the pyramid builders and us. They, the ancient Egyptians, aligned their pyramids with the stars and cardinal points, believing in a cosmic harmony. We, with eyes in the sky, search for their works with the tools of cosmic technology. There is a nice symmetry in that. And every time we find even a foundation trench or a portion of a long-lost pyramid, we are reminded that impermanence and endurance dance together in Egypt's story. Many pyramids have crumbled or vanished, yet traces remain, and as long as those traces exist, the pyramid's tale continues to evolve. Ultimately, the question, why doesn't Egypt have more pyramids, leads us to a deeper appreciation of those pyramids that do grace the Egyptian sands. Their rarity is not an accident, but a result of all the complex forces we've traced. It's often said that knowledge of limits is what separates a great society from a self-destructive one. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians, after a point, understood their limits, or were forced to confront them. They realized that endless pyramid building was unsustainable, either materially or spiritually. They adapted, changed course, and explored new ways of commemorating their dead and celebrating their kings. And so the pyramids stand isolated, magnificent singular peaks of achievement rather than a continuous mountain range. Now we return to the silent desert, in our mind's eye, at the break of dawn. The eastern sky blossoms from black to deep purple to gold. The first rays of sunlight strike the tips of Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza and Djoser's Step Pyramid far down the river at Saqqara. In those quiet moments, these ancient giants cast long blue shadows over the cooling sands. Each shadow is a reminder of a king and an epoch, a Khufu, a Djoser, a Sneferu, and of the collective will of a people who, for a time, achieved the seemingly impossible. Beyond the reach of those shadows lies the open desert, empty of pyramids. That emptiness is as eloquent as the monuments themselves. It speaks of the ebb in the tide of time, of the fact that the fervour and conditions that raised those giants came and went and did not come again. Perhaps the very scarcity of pyramids is part of why they so seize our imagination. Had dozens upon dozens of great pyramids littered the Nile from the Delta to Nubia, maybe we would find them almost commonplace, an expected skyline. But there is only one great pyramid, flanked by only 2 other major pyramids at Giza, and then a scattering of smaller cousins here and there. We can name the key pyramids on our fingers. They stand unique, each has its own character and story. The Step Pyramid stands alone as the first of its kind, a lone sentinel in the sands of Saqqara. The Bent Pyramid at Darsha stands with its peculiar profile, half straight, half bent, whispering about the engineering crisis its builders faced and overcame in their own way. The Red Pyramid nearby stands serene and changeless, Sneferu's triumph and the first true pyramid. Giza's triad looms like eternal mountains, the Great Pyramid austere and massive, Khafra's slightly smaller but elegant with its surviving cap of casing, Menkar's charmingly smaller with its history of attempted demolition leaving scars. There are others, yes. The pyramid of Yusakaf at Saqqara crumbled nearly flat. the pyramid of Unas, small but historically rich with its texts, the pyramids of the 5th dynasty queens, little satellites to the big ones, the mud brick pyramids of the Fayum, subdued and half melted, and the later pyramids of Nubia, standing sharp against the Sudanese sky. Each is a gem of a chapter in a very long story. Each invites wonder. If pyramids had been as common as temples or tombs, would we feel the same mystique? Unlikely. There is something profoundly poetic about their loneliness in the desert. They are like solitary sages seated in meditation, giant triangular silhouettes contemplating eternity while the world changes around them. They hint at what is possible when human aspiration reaches its loftiest heights, but also at what is transient when those heights cannot be sustained. In those ancient days, the Egyptians often likened a well-ruled state to a finely balanced creation. They thought if the pharaoh failed in his duties, the world could collapse into chaos. Building a pyramid was the ultimate act of balance between heaven and earth, between the immense weight of stone and the delicate alignments of astronomy, between the back-breaking toil of thousands and the soaring hopes invested in the final product. It required a delicate balance in society as well. The farmers had to produce enough surplus to feed labourers. The bureaucracy had to function with precision to gather materials from across the realm. The nobles had to cooperate. The priesthood had to sanction the effort. And the environment had to cooperate with good harvests. If any of those factors faltered, the enterprise would strain or fail. In a way, a pyramid was a barometer of the health of the kingdom. The huge pyramids arose only when all conditions were optimal. Their absence in later times underscores how rarely such conditions converge. And what of human ambition? The pyramids undeniably represent a kind of supreme ambition, an attempt to cheat death through monumentality, to make a hill of man-made stone that will resist the ravages of time. And for a remarkable span, they have done so. Yet tomb robbers and decay still reached within, teaching a humbling lesson that no matter how grand our works, absolute permanence is an illusion. The pharaohs sought immortality through those stones and largely achieved it, but not exactly as they imagined. They live on not as sovereigns enjoying their grave goods in the afterlife, but as names in history and as mummies in museums, as characters in our stories. The impermanence of their original intentions does not diminish the awe we feel. In fact, it adds a layer of poignancy. We stand before the pyramids today and marvel not just at their size, but at the audacity of humans long gone, and at the inexorable flow of time that even these stones have subtly yielded to, with their weathered edges and missing casings. We feel a connection across time, a mix of admiration and melancholy. The scarcity of pyramids in Egypt tells us that such peaks of human endeavour are rare by nature. Greatness in any civilization is a rare and delicate flower that blooms only when many conditions are just right. And even then, it cannot bloom perpetually. It has its season, and then it passes. The pyramids' lonely dominance on the landscape reminds us of this. They are like the highest of high tide marks on the shore of history. You can see how far the water of human will and ability once rose before it receded. In the end, Egypt doesn't have more pyramids because Egypt, as wise as it was, evolved beyond needing to build mountains each time a king died. The Egyptians found other expressions for their culture's soul, in literature, in art, in smaller but still meaningful monuments, and in the hearts of the people who continued to worship in the shadow of old monuments. One might even say the Egyptians learned a lesson in sustainability. The Old Kingdom's pyramid building was spectacular, but contributed perhaps to its downfall, economically or symbolically. The Middle and New Kingdoms sought a more balanced approach, still grand, but more sustainable. Whether or not that was a conscious choice, it was a fortuitous one that allowed their civilization to last another 1,000 years and more. Now, as the sun climbs higher over Giza, the Great Pyramid casts a shrinking shadow at its base. Tourists begin to mill about, looking like tiny specks next to those gigantic blocks, snapping photographs that flatten the pyramid into 2 dimensions, never quite capturing its bulk or the feel of the place. A camel driver leads his camel along the road, the animal's feet padding softly in the sand, indifferent to the wonder around it. Life in modern Egypt goes on around these ancient sentinels. The pyramids are no longer focal points of a living religion. They have become monuments of memory. And yet, their presence is powerful. The rarity of their kind means that to see them in person is an experience few forget. They inspire not just because they are big. Many things in our modern world are big, but because they are full of meaning and because they stood at the crux of so many human stories. Think of all the lives that a single pyramid encapsulated, the king who ordered it, dreaming of eternity, the architect who planned it, perhaps fearful yet determined to please his god-king, the tens of thousands of workers, farmers, masons, haulers, potters, bakers, brewers, who contributed their sweat and skills to build it, in hope of divine favour or at least good rations. The priests who consecrated it and then tended its altars, carrying the torch of memory forward. The thieves who later dared to violate it, driven by hunger or greed, and thus wrote the final chapter of its initial purpose. The archaeologists who, in modern times, painstakingly cleared its chambers again, seeking knowledge and attempting to understand its makers. Multiply these human dramas by each pyramid that was built, and consider that those dramas did not extend indefinitely because new pyramids stopped being built. Each pyramid we see is thus a completed epic with a beginning, middle, and end, rather than part of an endless continuum. That is partly why they feel monumental in time, not just in space. As our journey through this story draws to an end, we reflect on the paradox that sometimes less is more. Egypt doesn't have more pyramids, and that very fact makes the pyramids it does have all the more significant. They carry the weight of history that could have been spread over a larger number of monuments, but instead is concentrated in a few. They are precious rarities. Their endurance is a stroke of luck and design. Their survival is a dialogue between the intentional, their solid construction, and the circumstantial, sands preserving them, later peoples valuing them enough not to dismantle them entirely. The giants rose and the giants fell, not literally, for most still stand, but in the sense that the era that produced them ended. The questions linger in their absence, questions of mortality and ambition, of how a society chooses to remember its dead, of what is worth pouring resources into, and what legacy really means. The pyramids tease us with those questions and remain sphinx-like in their silence. We, the living, supply the answers through our study and our imagination. In a way, the pyramids did achieve a form of immortality, not the literal one the pharaohs might have hoped. None rose bodily to live among the stars as a living god-king in the flesh, but a cultural immortality. They have made their builders and the times in which they were built immortal in human memory. 5,000 years on, we still talk about Djoser and Khufu and their architects. We still feel awe at what was accomplished, and we still feel a slight sadness that we can never see that world at its peak, except through the faint echo that is an empty pyramid. Perhaps that is the truest kind of immortality any human can achieve, to be remembered and to inspire long after one's own time. The pyramids ensured that for their kings, so why doesn't Egypt have more pyramids? Because the stars of history aligned in certain moments to raise a pyramid, and those moments, like all moments, passed. Because Egypt's people and rulers grew, adapted, and chose other paths to eternity. Because even for a civilization as mighty as the pharaohs, there were limits to what could or should be done. The rarity of pyramids is a testament to the precious, ephemeral alignment of factors that give rise to any great human achievement. It's what makes them special and what lends them their aura of mystery. The desert wind blows lightly as our narrative comes to a close. We leave that lone figure standing where we began, in the quiet company of the pyramids as the day's first light breaks. The giants of stone keep their own counsel, as they have for ages. In their looming silence and in the vacant sands around them, we find a profound answer. Great things are rare. The pyramid's existence and the absence of more like them tell a story of impermanence, ambition, and the delicate balance required for greatness to rise. It is a story written in stone and sand, in light and shadow, and as long as those forms endure on the horizon, mankind will continue to ponder their rise and marvel at their solitude, learning again and again that sometimes the finest chapters of our history derive their power as much from what does not continue as from what does, from the silence after the music as much as from the music itself. The pyramids of Egypt stand, in the end, as eternal witnesses to the peaks of human aspiration and to the wisdom of knowing that such peaks, by their nature, cannot fill the whole landscape of time.